The shimmer of stars against the void had a particular quality in the 24th century: steady, constant, mapped. Captain Jean-Luc Picard stood before the main view screen of the USS Enterprise, hands clasped behind his back, admiring the serenity of Federation space near the neutral zone. His crew operated with the quiet efficiency of a finely tuned orchestra, Worf monitoring tactical, Data analyzing sensor readings, Riker reviewing patrol schedules. These were the moments Picard treasured most: exploration without crisis, discovery without conflict, the pure intellectual satisfaction of charting the unknown. Then reality tore itself apart. "Captain!" Data's voice carried that precise android urgency that meant something genuinely unprecedented had occurred. Sensors detect a massive subspace distortion bearing 273 Mark 5. The fabric of space-time is destabilizing. The view screen erupted with light. A spiral of crackling energy twisted into existence, blues and purples swirling like a wound in the cosmos itself. The bridge lights flickered as the Enterprise's shields automatically compensated for the gravitational shear. "Red alert," Picard commanded, moving swiftly to his captain's chair. The familiar klaxon sounded throughout the ship. "Shields up. Mr. Worf, identify that phenomenon." "Unknown, Captain," the Klingon security chief growled, his fingers dancing across tactical controls. "It reads as a subspace rift, but the energy signature is unlike anything in our database. Quantum resonance is off the scale. Through the rift, something metallic shot forward, not a ship, too small, but moving with impossible agility. Red and gold armor caught the starlight, repulsor jets flaring bright blue against the darkness. The figure tumbled through space, clearly attempting to stabilize, mechanical limbs adjusting thrust vectors in ways that violated several principles of conventional propulsion. "Magnify," Picard ordered. The view screen focused. A humanoid figure, approximately 2 meters tall, encased in sophisticated armor plating. The design was elegant, yet aggressive, sleek curves that suggested both aerodynamics and weaponry. A glowing circle in the chest piece pulsed with brilliant white-blue light, and the faceplate displayed 2 luminous eye slits that scanned the surrounding space with obvious intelligence. "Life signs?" Picard asked. "Affirmative," Data replied, his golden eyes reflecting the console's glow. "One human male, elevated heart rate, but stable. However, Captain, I am detecting technology integrated throughout his physiology that I cannot fully categorize. The energy source in his chest cavity alone generates 3.2 gigajoules per second." "That's impossible," Geordi LaForge interjected from the engineering station, his visor scanning the same readings. "That kind of power density in something that size would require." He paused, recalculating. "Captain, I don't know what it would require. It shouldn't exist." The armored figure completed its stabilization maneuvers and seemed to assess its situation. The head turned, surveying the Enterprise, the distant stars, the slowly closing subspace rift behind it. Even from this distance, Picard could sense the moment of realization this was not where the figure expected to be. "Hail them," Picard commanded. Worf worked his console. No response. "Their communication systems may be incompatible with our frequencies. Or they don't have any," Riker suggested, leaning forward in his first officer's chair. "That could be a pressure suit, not a spacecraft." "Transporter lock?" Picard asked. "Established," Worf confirmed. "But Captain, I must advise caution. Sensors detect multiple weapon systems integrated into that armor. Particle beam projectors in the palms, missile launchers in the shoulders, and something in the chest piece that could be a directed energy weapon of considerable power." Picard considered. First contact protocols were designed for ships, for civilizations, for deliberate encounters between spacefaring peoples. But this, a single being, armed, displaced through a phenomenon, even his chief science officer couldn't explain this, required a different approach. "Counselor Troi," Picard said, glancing at the empathic Betazoid beside him. "Your assessment?" Deanna Troi closed her eyes, reaching out with her telepathic senses. "Confusion, Captain. significant confusion and frustration, but also curiosity. There's no hostility at present, though I sense he's a man accustomed to fighting. His mind is extraordinarily active, calculating, analyzing, planning multiple contingencies simultaneously. This is someone who never stops thinking. Mr. Data, prepare a standard friendship message across all frequencies. Mr. LaForge, route universal translator algorithms to compensate for any linguistic variations. We'll try again. Data's fingers moved with inhuman speed. Message transmitted, Captain. Standard first contact greeting. Mathematical prime sequences to demonstrate intelligence, and an offer of assistance. For a moment, nothing. Then the figure's head tilted, as if listening to something. One armored hand rose to the helmet, and suddenly a voice crackled across the comm system. Male, human, American accent, dripping with the kind of sarcasm that Picard typically associated with people covering significant stress. Okay, Jarvis, I'm definitely not in New York anymore. You getting any of this? A second voice responded, artificial but sophisticated, emanating from the armor itself. Sir, my sensors are detecting a vessel approximately 643 meters in length. Technology appears several centuries advanced beyond current Earth capabilities. I'm also detecting what appears to be a subspace communication protocol that is attempting to interface with our systems. Several centuries? The figure's voice sharpened. How hard did that rift hit me? Jarvis, damage assessment. Armor integrity at 87%. Arc reactor functioning nominally. Repulsors, weapons systems, and flight capability all operational. However, sir, I cannot establish satellite connection. GPS is non-functional, and I'm detecting no Earth-based signals whatsoever. There was a pause heavy enough that Picard imagined he could hear the gears turning in this stranger's mind. Captain, Data said quietly, I believe the universal translator is successfully passing his language. It appears to be English, late 20th or early 21st century variant. The artificial intelligence he's conversing with demonstrates remarkable sophistication for that technological era. The armored figure rotated slowly, taking in the Enterprise's impressive bulk, the distant stars, the now closed rift that had brought him here. When he spoke again, his voice carried a forced lightness that didn't quite mask the underlying tension. All right, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say I'm not in Kansas anymore. Actually, I'm going to guess I'm not even in the same reality anymore. The talking starship want to fill me in on where exactly I just fell out of the universe. Picard allowed himself the smallest smile. Humor under pressure, a very human trait. He gestured to Worf, who opened the channel. This is Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Federation starship Enterprise. You've emerged from what our sensors indicate was an interdimensional subspace rift. On behalf of the United Federation of Planets, I welcome you and offer assistance. May I ask who you are? Another pause. Then, Tony Stark. And yeah, I'm definitely going to need that assistance. Also, just for the record, Federation starship, are you telling me I just crash-landed in Star Trek? If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe. You'd want to see them down in the comments below. To boldly go where no one has gone before, Picard exchanged glances with Riker, who shrugged slightly. The reference meant nothing to them, but the tone suggested this Tony Stark had at least some framework for understanding his situation, or thought he did. I'm unfamiliar with that reference, Mr. Stark. But yes, you are now in Federation space, approximately 15 light-years from the Romulan neutral zone. Given your condition and the exotic nature of your arrival, I'd like to offer you the hospitality of the Enterprise. We have medical facilities that can ensure you've suffered no ill effects from your transit, and perhaps together we can determine how you arrived here and how you might return home. The armored figure Tony Stark seemed to consider this. His hand drifted to his chest, where that mysterious power source continued its steady pulse. Yeah, okay, let's do this. But Captain Picard, fair warning. Where I come from, Strange glowing rifts and unexpected space travel usually means someone's trying to invade Earth or end the universe. So if this is some kind of elaborate trap, you should know I'm having a really bad day already, and I've blown up bigger things than your ship. Worf's hand moved reflexively toward weapons controls, but Picard raised a calming hand. No trap, Mr. Stark. Merely curiosity and a desire to help. Energize. The transporter chief's voice came through. Aye, sir. Golden light enveloped the armored figure, and Tony Stark dissolved into a stream of matter and energy, beginning his journey from the cold of space into the heart of the Enterprise, and into a universe that would challenge everything he thought he knew about humanity's future. The transporter room materialized around Tony Stark in a cascade of golden light and harmonious sound. He'd experienced teleportation before magical portals courtesy of Strange, quantum tunneling in experimental Stark tech, but this felt different, cleaner somehow, more deliberate. As the shimmer faded, he found himself standing on a raised platform, still fully armored, repulsors charging reflexively as he assessed potential threats. What he found instead was fascinating. The room was utilitarian yet elegant, all smooth surfaces and ambient lighting. A control console manned by a young officer in a uniform that looked like something from a utopian future film. And standing before him, flanked by a massive humanoid with a ridged forehead and a security posture Tony recognized instantly, was an android, not a robot. An android. The distinction was immediately apparent. The being stood approximately 6 feet tall, with pale golden skin that caught the light in ways human flesh never could. His eyes were golden as well, studying Tony with an expression of profound curiosity that seemed utterly genuine despite the artificial nature of the face. The android wore the same uniform as the others, black with gold shoulders, a communicator badge on the chest. Fascinating, the android said, his head tilting slightly. Your armor incorporates technology I cannot fully analyze. The power source in your chest cavity operates on principles that appear to violate our understanding of miniaturized energy generation. Tony's faceplate retracted with a mechanical hiss, revealing his face goatee, arc reactor glow reflecting off his features, eyes sharp with intelligence and carefully controlled anxiety. He looked at the android, then at the massive security officer whose hand rested near what was definitely a weapon, then back to the android. Jarvis, Tony said quietly. Please tell me you're recording this. All sensors active, sir. His AI responded through the armor's speakers. Though I must note that my analysis capabilities are significantly hampered by the exotic nature of the technology surrounding us. The android's eyes brightened with interest. You have an artificial intelligence integrated into your armor. The sophistication is remarkable, particularly if you are indeed from a less technologically advanced era. I am Lieutenant Commander Data, Second Officer and Operations Officer of the Enterprise. I am an android. Tony stepped down from the transporter pad slowly, hands visible, repulsors powered down but ready. Yeah, I caught that. The whole golden skin and perfectly measured speech patterns thing was a clue. Tony Stark, engineer, futurist, occasionally responsible for saving the world. And you're right about Jarvis, he's top-of-the-line AI, probably the most sophisticated on Earth. Was on Earth, depending on whether Earth still exists here. Earth exists and thrives, Data replied. It is the home world of the United Federation of Planets and humanity's birthplace. However, I suspect the Earth you know, and our Earth may be significantly different. How different are we talking? We are in the year 2368 by Earth calendar. Humanity has achieved faster than light travel, eliminated poverty, war, and most diseases. We have formed a peaceful alliance with over 150 member worlds spanning 8,000 light years. Money no longer exists as a motivator for human endeavor. Tony blinked. I'm sorry, you lost me at money no longer exists. That's not that. Doesn't make economic sense. What do people work for? How do you allocate resources? Who decides who gets what? We have replicator technology, Data explained with the patience of someone who'd had this conversation before. Machines that can rearrange matter at the molecular level to create virtually anything needed: food, clothing, tools, components. When scarcity is eliminated, the economic systems built around scarcity become obsolete. Humans now work for personal fulfillment, the advancement of knowledge, and the betterment of society. Tony stared at him. His engineer's mind immediately began calculating the implications: zero-point energy, advanced molecular manipulation. The sheer computing power required for that level of precision would be— "Sir," Jarvis interjected, "my scans confirm the presence of such devices throughout the ship. The technology appears genuine." "Mr. Stark," the security officer rumbled, his voice deep and clearly non-human. "I am Lieutenant Worf, Chief of Security. The captain requests your presence on the bridge, if you would follow us." Tony looked at the massive officer Klingon, his mind supplied from half-remembered sci-fi knowledge, and made a calculated decision. He'd been in stranger situations, usually. "Lead the way. But just so we're clear, the armor stays on until I'm comfortable." "Understandable," Data said as they moved toward the door. "You have experienced significant displacement and cannot yet assess whether you are safe. Your caution is logical." They walked through corridors that hummed with barely perceptible energy. Everything was clean, efficient, designed with both function and aesthetics in mind. Crew members passed by human, humanoid, and distinctly alien, all wearing variations of the same uniform, all nodding respectfully. None carried visible weapons, none looked afraid. "Data," Tony said as they entered a turbolift. "You said you're an android. Who built you?" "Dr. Noonien Soong, a cyberneticist of exceptional brilliance. He created me to explore the nature of humanity and consciousness. I have been operational for 26 years, 7 months, and 18 days. And in that time, have you achieved consciousness? Are you self-aware, or are you a very sophisticated simulation of self-awareness?" Data turned to him, and Tony saw something unexpected in those golden eyes: appreciation for the question itself. "That is a matter of ongoing philosophical debate, Mr. Stark. Legally, I have been recognized as a sentient being with full rights under Federation law. Personally, I experience existence, make choices, and value my continued operation. Whether that constitutes true consciousness or an elaborate simulation is perhaps a question without a definitive answer." "That's the most honest response I've ever heard from an AI," Tony said quietly. "Jarvis is brilliant, but he'd be the first to tell you he's not actually conscious. Though you might actually be." "Sir," Jarvis said through the armor, "I feel I should point out that consciousness is overrated. I function perfectly well with directed intelligence parameters." Data's lips curved into something that might have been a smile. "Your AI has a sense of humor. That is quite sophisticated." The turbolift doors opened onto the bridge, and Tony Stark stepped into a space that simultaneously confirmed and contradicted everything he thought he knew about the future. The room was shaped like a horseshoe, with stations arranged in a logical hierarchy. The main view screen dominated the forward wall, currently displaying a starfield of breathtaking clarity. The command chairs sat in the center, occupied by 2 men, one older, bald, with the bearing of someone who commanded through respect rather than fear, and one younger with a beard, leaning forward with obvious curiosity. "Mr. Stark," Captain Picard said, rising from his chair, "welcome aboard the Enterprise." Tony's faceplate retracted fully, and he took in the bridge with an engineer's eye. The technology was decades, no, centuries beyond anything he'd seen. But more than that, the atmosphere was wrong. Too calm, too confident. These people weren't soldiers preparing for battle. They were explorers, expecting wonder. "Captain," Tony said, walking forward carefully. "Nice ship, very. Optimistic design philosophy. Where I come from, military vessels tend more toward intimidating and less toward we come in peace. The Enterprise is not a military vessel," Picard replied. "We are a ship of exploration and diplomacy. Our primary mission is to seek out new life and new civilizations. Defense is secondary to discovery. Tony glanced at Worf's tactical station, noting the weapons controls. You say that, but I'm seeing enough firepower to level a city. We are capable of defending ourselves when necessary, Picard acknowledged. But we prefer not to be. Mr. Stark, your arrival has created a unique situation. You've crossed what appears to be a dimensional barrier, something our science suggests should be impossible. The energy required alone would be astronomical, Tony finished. Yeah, I was testing a new arc reactor configuration, trying to tap into quantum field fluctuations for enhanced power generation. There was an explosion, a spiral of light, and then I was here. Jarvis, show them the reactor data from the moment of transit. Sir, are you certain? That's proprietary Stark Industries technology. Tony looked around the bridge at Data's curious expression, at Picard's dignified patience, at the crew members who watched with interest but not hostility, at a universe where humanity had apparently gotten its act together. Jarvis, I don't think intellectual property law applies when you're in a different reality. Show them. A holographic projection materialized from Tony's gauntlet, his own HUD data, energy readings. The moment the arc reactor's output spiked into impossible numbers, Data moved closer, his eyes processing information at superhuman speed. The energy spike coincides with a subspace frequency that shouldn't exist in normal spacetime. Data observed. Mr. Stark, I believe your reactor accidentally created a resonance cascade that forced open a naturally occurring but dormant dimensional membrane. The odds of this occurring by chance are approximately 4 billion to 1. So I got incredibly unlucky, Tony said. Or incredibly fortunate, Picard replied. You could have emerged in deep space, or inside a star, or in any number of lethal environments. Instead, you arrived near a Federation starship capable of assisting you. That suggests either remarkable luck or something more intentional. Tony's eyes narrowed. You think something pulled me here deliberately? I think it's a possibility we should investigate, Picard said. But first, Dr. Crusher should examine you. The arc reactor in your chest, that's not standard human anatomy. Tony's hand moved to his chest reflexively, covering the glowing circle. It's keeping me alive. Shrapnel near my heart. The reactor generates an electromagnetic field that prevents the shrapnel from reaching vital organs. It's also my power source. Data tilted his head. Elegant solution. Risky, but elegant. However, I am curious, in a society with advanced medical technology, could the shrapnel not simply be removed? In my time? Maybe, probably. But when I built the first version, I was in a cave in Afghanistan with a box of scraps and about 48 hours to live. You work with what you have. A new voice entered the conversation, warm, professional, touched with concern. A woman in a blue medical uniform approached from the turbo lift. Dr. Beverly Crusher, Chief Medical Officer. Mr. Stark, I'd like to examine you in sickbay. If that device is integrated into your cardiovascular system, I need to make sure the dimensional transit didn't affect it. Tony looked at Picard, who nodded reassurance. Dr. Crusher is one of the finest physicians in Starfleet. You're in good hands. All right, Tony said, but the armor stays on until I'm sure I'm not going to need it. No offense, but in my experience, trusting too quickly gets you killed. None taken, Picard said. Mr. Data, please accompany Mr. Stark and assist Dr. Crusher with the technical aspects of his armor. Commander Riker, coordinate with Geordi. I want a full analysis of that subspace rift. If Mr. Stark came through, something else might follow. As Tony turned to leave with Data and Dr. Crusher, he paused. Captain, one question. You said Earth eliminated war and poverty. How long ago? The last World War ended in 2053, Picard replied. We had nearly destroyed ourselves, 600 million dead, most major cities in ruins. But we rebuilt. First contact with the Vulcans in 2063 showed us we weren't alone, and that humanity could be better than we were. We've spent the last 3 centuries proving it. Tony absorbed this. A humanity that had stared into the abyss and chosen to change. A future where the best of human nature won. That's He started, then stopped. "I'll be in sickbay." As the turbolift doors closed behind him, Data beside him and Dr. Crusher already scanning him with a medical tricorder, Tony Stark allowed himself to wonder, what did it mean when the future you'd been fighting for already existed just in a different universe? Sickbay gleamed with the same efficient elegance as the rest of the Enterprise. Medical beds lined the walls, equipped with displays showing vital signs in formats. Tony's engineering mind found simultaneously familiar and alien. The ambient lighting carried a subtle warmth designed to calm patients, and the air itself smelled faintly of something antiseptic, but not unpleasant. Dr. Crusher gestured toward one of the biobeds. "If you'd like to sit, Mr. Stark, I can begin the examination. The scanners are non-invasive." Tony remained standing, arms crossed. "Doctor, no offense to your medical expertise, but I've had experience with people wanting to examine my technology. It usually ends with someone trying to weaponize it or steal it. So before we go further, I need to understand what I'm dealing with here." Data, standing near a medical console, tilted his head thoughtfully. "Your concern is logical. In your era, military and corporate interests likely compete for technological advantages. However, the Federation operates under different principles. So Captain Picard said, post-scarcity, no money, everyone working for the betterment of humanity." Tony's voice carried skepticism, honed by years of corporate boardrooms and government hearings. "Look, that's a beautiful dream, but I've seen human nature up close. People want power, they want control, they want to be on top. You can't just replicate that away." Dr. Crusher set down her medical tricorder and met his eyes directly. "You're right that we can't replicate away human nature, but we can remove the circumstances that make the worst aspects of human nature necessary for survival. When no one is starving, when everyone has shelter and medical care, when education is universal and knowledge is freely shared, the competition for resources becomes obsolete. What about ambition? Innovation? Competition drives progress, does it?" Data interjected. "Or does necessity drive progress, and competition merely determines who profits from it? Consider your own arc reactor technology, Mr. Stark. You created it under duress to save your life. The competitive market environment did not inspire that innovation, desperation, and brilliance did." Tony opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. The android had a point. In the Federation, Data continued, innovation occurs because individuals are passionate about solving problems, not because they need to monetize solutions. Scientists pursue research because the questions fascinate them. Engineers build because creation itself is rewarding. Artists create because expression fulfills them. Captain Picard once told me that the acquisition of wealth is no longer the driving force in human lives. The challenge of improving oneself and contributing to society has replaced it. "That's very idealistic," Tony said. "But I've met people who'd burn the world down just to rule the ashes. What about them? They exist," Dr. Crusher acknowledged. "Human nature includes capacity for both extraordinary compassion and terrible cruelty. But when society is structured to reinforce the former rather than reward the latter, when mental health care is universal and social support is robust, when isolation and desperation are eliminated, those darker impulses find less fertile ground." Tony looked between the Doctor and the android, his analytical mind processing their arguments against decades of experience with arms dealers, corrupt politicians, and organizations like Hydra infiltrating S.H.I.E.L.D. from within. "You're telling me you've built a utopia?" "No," Data said simply. "We have built a work in progress. The Federation is not perfect. We face challenges, make mistakes, encounter species, and situations that test our principles. But we have proven that humanity is capable of more than survival. We are capable of thriving together." "Jarvis," Tony said quietly. "Analysis." His AI responded through the armor's internal speakers, inaudible to the others. "Sir, my scans of the ship's systems reveal no indications of deception. The replicator technology is genuine. as are the power generation systems and computer networks. If this is an elaborate fabrication, it exceeds any simulation capability I can conceive. I recommend cautious cooperation while gathering more data. Tony sighed and sat on the biobed. All right, examine away, Doctor. But just so we're clear, the arc reactor is non-negotiable. It's keeping me alive. Doctor. Crusher activated the biobed's scanners, and holographic displays materialized above Tony's chest, showing his cardiovascular system in stunning detail. She frowned slightly, adjusting the scan parameters. The shrapnel is indeed positioned dangerously close to your heart. The electromagnetic field from your reactor is deflecting the fragments. But this is an incredibly precarious solution, Mr. Stark. With our medical technology, I could remove the shrapnel in approximately 30 minutes. No scarring, no reactor necessary. Tony's hand went to his chest reflexively. You could just remove it? No catch? No side effects? Our surgical techniques utilize cellular regenerators and microtransporters. We can beam the shrapnel out at the molecular level, while simultaneously healing the tissue damage. You'd be completely healed within hours. She paused, studying his expression. But you're hesitant. May I ask why? Because the arc reactor is more than life support, Tony said quietly. It's who I've become. Tony Stark with an arc reactor in his chest is Iron Man. Tony Stark without it is just a guy who used to build weapons. Data moved closer, his golden eyes curious. The reactor has become part of your identity. You fear that removing it would diminish you. Wouldn't you feel the same? Tony challenged. You're an android. If someone offered to make you fully human organic brain, biological body, would you take it? Data considered this. I have spent considerable effort attempting to understand and emulate humanity. I study human behavior, emotions, art, and philosophy. In some ways, becoming fully human is my aspiration. However, I am uncertain whether I would accept such an offer if it were possible. My positronic brain is part of who I am. The unique perspective I have as an artificial being contributes to my value as an individual and as a Starfleet officer. Exactly. Tony gestured at his chest. This reactor makes me different. It gives me capabilities I wouldn't have otherwise. Taking it out feels like giving up part of myself, even if logically it makes sense. Doctor, Crusher smiled slightly. Then we won't remove it without your consent. Though I would like to run some tests to ensure the reactor isn't causing any long-term cellular damage. Fair compromise? Fair compromise, Tony agreed. As Dr. Crusher worked, Data circled the biobed, examining the armor with scientific fascination. The integration between your biological systems and technological systems is remarkable. The armor responds to neural impulses, neural interface, combined with gesture recognition and vocal commands. Jarvis handles most of the processing, translating my intentions into actions. Repulsors, flight stabilizers, weapons systems, all of it responds faster than conscious thought. May I ask about your weapons systems? The sensors detected multiple armaments. In your time, are such personal weapons common? Tony's expression hardened. No, they're necessary. Where I come from, there are threats. Alien invasions, rogue AI, terrorists with advanced technology, and gods who think Earth is their playground. Someone has to stand between humanity and those threats. The armor is how I do that. You bear significant responsibility, Data observed. Do others assist you? I'm part of a team, the Avengers. But yeah, I shoulder a lot of it. Comes with the territory when you're the guy who can build things no one else can. Data was silent for a moment, processing. Mr. Stark, may I offer an observation? Your society appears to concentrate defensive responsibility in the hands of exceptional individuals. The Federation distributes that responsibility across Starfleet, Diplomatic Corps, and member world defense forces. No single person must bear the weight of protecting billions. That sounds nice in theory, Tony said. But when Thanos shows up with an army, you need people who can make the hard calls fast. Who is Thanos? Long story. Genocidal titan who thinks killing half the universe will save the other half. Standard Tuesday. Doctor. Crusher and Data exchanged glances. The doctor's tricorder readings faltered momentarily. Half the universe, she repeated carefully. That's not surely you're exaggerating. I wish I was. He succeeded once. Snapped his fingers, Infinity Stones did the work, and half of all living things turned to dust. We got them back, but it cost. Tony's voice caught. It cost everything. The silence that followed was profound. Data's expression shifted to something approaching distress, or as close as his android features could approximate. You experienced a genocide of universal scale, Data said quietly. The psychological trauma alone would be, yeah, well, therapy's expensive, and I don't like talking about my feelings. Tony cut him off. The point is, in my universe, you need people ready to make the ultimate sacrifice. The Federation sounds great, Data, but what happens when you face something that doesn't care about your ideals? Something that just wants to destroy? We have faced such threats, Data replied. The Borg Collective seeks to assimilate all sentient life, eliminating individuality and free will. They have cost thousands of lives and remain one of our greatest existential threats. But we face them not as individuals bearing impossible burdens, but as a united federation. And when that's not enough, then we adapt, innovate, and persevere together. Captain Picard was assimilated by the Borg and used against us. We did not respond with overwhelming force alone. We used strategy, compassion, and the strength of our collective resolve. We rescued him, restored his humanity, and he continues to serve with honor despite the trauma. Tony absorbed this. A universe where even in the face of nightmare scenarios, people chose collaboration over isolation, where trauma was acknowledged and healed, rather than buried beneath armor, literal and metaphorical. Your medical scans are complete, Doctor, Crusher said, reviewing the data. The arc reactor is functioning without causing cellular damage. Your cardiovascular system has actually adapted remarkably well to its presence. However, I am concerned about your stress levels. The cortisol in your bloodstream suggests chronic anxiety and sleep deprivation, occupational hazard, or a consequence of bearing responsibility alone that should be shared, she said gently. Mr. Stark, you don't have to carry everything by yourself. Before Tony could respond, the ship's communicator chimed. Bridge to sickbay. Mr. Stark, this is Captain Picard. When Dr. Crusher has completed her examination, would you join me in engineering? Lieutenant Commander LaForge has some questions about your arc reactor that may help us understand the nature of your transit and potentially how to reverse it. Tony stood, his armor's systems running through diagnostic checks. On my way, Captain. Doctor, thanks for not trying to dissect me. I'm a physician, not a researcher, she replied with a smile. Though I suspect Geordi will have plenty of questions. As Tony left sickbay with Data, he found himself considering the implications of everything he'd learned. A future where humanity's better angels won, where cooperation replaced competition, where knowledge was shared freely, where the Federation's founding principle was literally infinite diversity in infinite combinations. It sounded too good to be true. But the more he saw, the more he wondered, what if it actually was true? And if humanity could reach this future in one universe, what did that mean for his own? Engineering was a cathedral to controlled power. The warp core dominated the center of the vast space, a towering column of pulsing light, matter and antimatter dancing in precise annihilation, converted to energy that could bend space itself. Tony stopped at the entrance, his engineer's soul recognizing beauty and function married perfectly. The hum of the core resonated at a frequency that felt almost alive. Impressive, isn't it? The voice belonged to a man in his 30s, with a visor device covering his eyes, a curved band that wrapped across his face where eyes should be. He approached with an engineer's confident stride, hand extended. Geordi LaForge, chief engineer. And yeah, she's beautiful. 97% efficiency on matter-antimatter conversion, dilithium crystal matrix that can sustain warp 9.6 for 12 hours. This ship is my pride and joy. Tony shook his hand, studying the visor with professional curiosity. That device sensory replacement? Born blind, Geordie confirmed. The visor lets me see across the entire electromagnetic spectrum. Infrared, ultraviolet, subspace harmonics. I can see things most people can't imagine. Though I've been told I'm missing out on the color blue. And they couldn't just fix your eyes. They could now, Geordie said with a slight smile. Medical technology has advanced. But the visor gives me capabilities regular vision doesn't. It's a trade-off I've chosen to keep. Besides, it's part of who I am. Tony thought of his arc reactor, Data's positronic brain, the way identity became intertwined with technology. I understand that. So, Geordie gestured toward a workstation where Data was already interfacing with the Enterprise's computer. The captain wants us to figure out how you got here and how we might send you back. Mind if I take a look at that arc reactor of yours? Not invasive, just external scans to understand the energy signature. Tony considered, then nodded. Jarvis, open the exterior reactor housing. Passive scans only. The chest plate of his armor irised open, revealing the glowing arc reactor beneath. Geordie's visor immediately focused on it, and his expression shifted to one of profound fascination. That's incredible. The energy density is off the charts. What are you using for fuel? Palladium core. Though I synthesized a new element to replace it after palladium toxicity became an issue. The reactor generates power through controlled microfusion reactions, mediated by the element's unique atomic structure. Geordie pulled up a holographic display, running scans. You synthesized a new element. How? That requires particle accelerators, and I built a particle accelerator in my workshop. Took about 6 hours. Data looked up from his console. You constructed a particle accelerator in 6 hours with 21st century technology. 21st century Earth technology, Tony corrected. And yeah, when you're dying of palladium poisoning and your dead father left you cryptic clues in a World's Fair model, you work fast. Geordie and Data exchanged glances. The engineer whistled low. Mr. Stark, your level of innovation is remarkable. In our time, new elements are typically discovered through collaborative research involving hundreds of scientists and years of work. Yeah, well, I didn't have years. Had about 3 days before the reactor killed me. Tony watched the holographic display as it mapped his reactor's energy output. What are you seeing? Quantum tunneling effects that shouldn't be stable at this scale, Geordie replied, manipulating the display. Your reactor is generating power by creating controlled micro-wormholes at the atomic level, using this synthesized element to stabilize the reaction. It's brilliant, but it's also incredibly dangerous. If the containment field failed, explosion equivalent to a small nuclear weapon, yeah, I know. That's why the housing is made of gold titanium alloy, and why Jarvis monitors it constantly. Speaking of which, Tony gestured to the warp core. You're doing basically the same thing on a macro scale. Matter-antimatter annihilation is about as dangerous as it gets. True, Geordie acknowledged. But we have 400 years of refinement and safety protocols. Your reactor is raw, powerful, and elegant, but built under duress with limited resources. You're making it work through sheer brilliance and constant vigilance. Story of my life, Tony muttered. Data approached, his tricorder scanning the reactor from multiple angles. Mr. Stark, when you activated your new reactor configuration, the test that resulted in your transit here, what precisely were you attempting to accomplish? Tony pulled up his own holographic displays from his armor's memory banks. I was trying to tap into quantum field fluctuations to increase power output without increasing reactor size. The math suggested I could access zero-point energy, the energy inherent in empty space itself. If it worked, I'd have effectively unlimited power in a package the size of my palm. Zero-point energy, Geordie repeated slowly. We've theorized about accessing it, but the energy required to create a stable extraction interface exceeds any practical power source. It's a catch-22. unless you already have an insanely powerful reactor that can bootstrap the process, Tony said. I hit the activation threshold, the quantum fields aligned, and then light, heat, reality tearing open. And suddenly I'm here. Data's fingers flew across his console, accessing Federation physics database, cross-referencing with subspace mechanics and dimensional theory. He paused, his golden eyes widening fractionally, a significant reaction from an android. Mr. Stark, I believe I understand what happened. Your attempt to access zero-point energy created a resonance cascade with subspace. Subspace is the foundation of faster-than-light travel. In our universe, it exists as a domain beneath normal space-time. When your reactor achieved quantum field resonance, it accidentally created a harmonic frequency with subspace itself, and that opened a door to your universe. Tony finished. A door I fell through, precisely. However, the implications are profound. If your reactor can interface with subspace, it suggests that subspace, and therefore our universe, exists adjacent to yours. We may be parallel dimensions separated by a quantum membrane. Geordi was already pulling up new displays. If that's true, we could theoretically recreate the resonance cascade and send you home. We'd need to calculate the exact frequency, generate a stable subspace rift, and provide enough power to force it open. The Enterprise's warp core could supply the power, but the frequency calculations would require precise measurements of the energy signature from my original transit, Tony said. Jarvis, you recorded everything, right? All data preserved, sir, including the exact quantum state of the reactor at the moment of displacement. Then we have what we need, Data said. However, I must note that attempting to recreate the conditions of your transit carries significant risk. The probability of successfully targeting your original universe versus another parallel dimension is approximately 67% based on initial calculations. Tony leaned against a console, processing this. 67% chance of getting home. 33% chance of ending up somewhere even more bizarre. Or dying in the attempt. What happens if we don't try? He asked. If I just stay here, Geordi considered. Well, you'd be stranded in our universe permanently. You'd need to find a place in Federation society, which wouldn't be impossible. Your skills as an engineer are clearly extraordinary. Starfleet Academy would probably love to have you as an instructor, or you could work with the Corps of Engineers or research facilities across the Federation. You wouldn't starve, you wouldn't be homeless. The Federation takes care of everyone. But I'd never see Earth again, Tony said quietly. My Earth, my timeline. The Avengers would think I'm dead. Pepper would. He stopped, his jaw tightening. Data stepped forward. You have people who depend on you. Responsibilities you cannot simply abandon. That is admirable, Mr. Stark. It also suggests you care deeply for others despite your self-reliant exterior. Yeah, well, don't spread that around. Ruins my reputation as a narcissistic billionaire playboy philanthropist. Billionaire? Geordi asked. So you possessed significant wealth in your time? Stark Industries was one of the largest tech companies on Earth. Defense contracts, clean energy, AI research. I inherited the company from my father, turned it away from weapons manufacturing after I realized how much damage we were doing. Now we focus on technology that helps people rather than kills them. A moral evolution, Data observed. You recognized your complicity in harm and chose to change. That demonstrates capacity for growth. Or guilt, Tony said. Lot of people died because of weapons with my name on them. I've been trying to make up for it ever since. Geordi's expression softened. Mr. Stark, in the Federation, we believe that people can change, that mistakes don't define us permanently. What you did, recognizing the harm and working to correct it, that's exactly the kind of moral courage we value. Yeah, well, in my universe, corporate responsibility is a PR strategy, not a philosophy. Perhaps that's why you ended up here, Data said thoughtfully. To see what humanity can become when moral courage becomes the foundation of society rather than the exception. Tony opened his mouth to respond, then stopped. Was that possible? Had some force or intelligence deliberately pulled him to this universe as a lesson? Or was he giving meaning to random chance? The engineering console chimed. Bridge to engineering, Mr. LaForge. Sensors are detecting an unusual subspace disturbance approximately 2 light-years from our position. It matches the signature of the rift that brought Mr. Stark through. Geordi's hands flew across the controls. Captain, I'm seeing it. Subspace frequency is fluctuating, but it's definitely related to Stark's transit. It's almost like an echo, or something following his trail. Captain Picard's voice carried concern. Yellow alert. Mr. LaForge, I want continuous monitoring. If that disturbance strengthens, I want to know immediately. Aye. Captain, Tony felt his armor's systems go into readiness mode automatically. Something followed me through. Unknown? Data replied, his fingers accessing sensor data. The disturbance could be residual energy from your transit, or it could indicate another dimensional breach forming. If something or someone in your universe detected your displacement and attempted to follow, then we could have company, Tony finished. And in my experience, when mysterious dimensional portals start opening, it's usually not friendly. Geordi looked between Tony and Data. So what do we do? If something hostile comes through and we're not prepared? We prepare, Tony said simply. Data, can you interface Jarvis with your computer systems? He's got extensive files on extra-dimensional threats, alien species from my universe, and combat protocols. If something's coming through that rift, you'll want every advantage. I can establish an interface. Data confirmed. However, introducing an unknown AI into the Enterprise's computer core carries risks. Jarvis? Tony asked. Sir, I can operate in an isolated environment without compromising their systems. I'm not interested in taking over their ship. I'm interested in keeping you alive. Data nodded slowly. Captain, request permission to create an isolated computing environment for Mr. Stark's AI to share tactical data. Granted, Picard's voice came back. But Data, you will personally monitor all interactions. Mr. Stark, I appreciate your willingness to share information, but I must protect my ship. Understood, Captain, Tony replied. Jarvis, play nice. I always play nice, sir. It's you who causes the explosions. Geordi couldn't help but smile. Your AI has personality. That's rare even in our time. Jarvis is one of a kind, Tony agreed. Now, let's figure out what's knocking on your dimensional door before it decides to kick it down. As the three of them bent over the consoles, analyzing data and running calculations, Tony felt something unexpected. Excitement. He was collaborating with an android who might be conscious, a blind engineer who could see more than anyone else, working with technology centuries beyond his own, in a universe where humanity had achieved its potential. Whatever was coming through that rift, they'd face it together. And for the first time since falling through reality, Tony Stark didn't feel quite so alone. The briefing room adjacent to the bridge reflected the Enterprise's design philosophy, functional yet elegant, with a long oval table and chairs arranged for collaborative discussion rather than hierarchical presentation. Captain Picard sat at the head, fingers steepled thoughtfully as he listened to the gathered officers. Tony stood near the view screen, armor retracted to show his face. Jarvis's interface active as holographic data streamed between his systems and Data's console. The subspace disturbance has stabilized approximately 2 light-years away, Data reported. It is not expanding, but it is also not dissipating. The energy signature suggests something is maintaining it from the other side. Maintaining it intentionally? Commander Riker asked. Likely, Data confirmed. Random quantum fluctuations would not produce such stable harmonics. Tony gestured at the holographic display showing the rift's energy patterns. In my universe, when dimensional barriers get punched through, things usually want to use that hole for their own purposes. Best case, scientific expedition. Worst case, invasion force. We need to know which. Agreed, Picard said. However, I've requested additional expertise before we proceed. Ah, here they are now. The briefing room doors opened, and two figures entered. The first was humanoid with distinctly Vulcan features, pointed ears, upswept eyebrows, an expression of absolute composure. He wore civilian robes rather than a Starfleet uniform, deep burgundy with subtle geometric patterns. The second figure was smaller, rotund, with large ears and sharp teeth visible when he grinned a Ferengi. Tony's memory supplied from Data's brief cultural overview. Ambassador Sarek of Vulcan, Picard introduced. He was aboard the Enterprise for diplomatic consultations when Mr. Stark arrived. Ambassador, this is Tony Stark, the individual who transited from a parallel dimension. Sarek's gaze swept over Tony with analytical precision that reminded him uncomfortably of being examined under a microscope. Fascinating. Captain Picard briefed me on your situation. A human from an alternate Earth, displaced through subspace resonance, carrying technology that should not exist by your era's standards. He moved closer, studying Tony's arc reactor with scientific interest. Your emotional state is highly elevated. Anxiety, defensiveness, and an underlying fear poorly concealed by sarcasm. Tony stiffened. Excuse me? Vulcans are touch telepaths, Data explained quietly. Ambassador Sarek can sense emotions even without physical contact when they are sufficiently strong. So you're reading my feelings without permission? That's logical, Sarek interrupted calmly. You are an unknown element in a delicate situation. Understanding your psychological state is essential to predicting your behavior and assessing potential threat levels. Your fear is understandable. You are displaced from your reality, surrounded by unfamiliar technology and species, uncertain of your ability to return home. However, your defensive posturing suggests deeper issues. You do not trust easily. Yeah, well, in my experience, telepaths who casually invade your privacy usually have ulterior motives. Sarek raised an eyebrow fractionally, the Vulcan equivalent of surprise. An interesting assumption. You have encountered telepaths in your universe, mind readers, reality warpers, guys who can control you with a thought. After a while, you develop healthy paranoia about people poking around in your head. Your caution is logical given your experiences, Sarek acknowledged. However, I assure you that Vulcan telepathy operates under strict ethical guidelines. We do not probe minds without consent. What I sense is merely emotional resonance, surface impressions, not thoughts or memories. Tony wanted to stay angry, but the Vulcan's absolute composure and directness diffused his defensiveness. Sarek wasn't apologizing or justifying, he was simply stating facts and acknowledging Tony's perspective. It was oddly refreshing compared to the political doublespeak he was used to. Fine, Tony said. But for the record, I'd appreciate a heads up before anyone starts sensing my emotional state. Noted, Sarek replied. He turned to Picard. Captain, I have reviewed the data on Mr. Stark's displacement. The subspace mechanics are unprecedented but theoretically sound. However, I am more concerned with the philosophical implications. Philosophical implications? Riker asked. Mr. Stark comes from a universe where humanity has not achieved the social evolution we have accomplished. His Earth still operates under capitalist economic systems. Nation-states engage in armed conflict, and individuals like himself must serve as vigilantes because governmental and social systems have failed to provide adequate security and justice. Tony's jaw tightened. We're not perfect, but we're trying. Indeed, Sarek said. But your individual approach to problem solving is concerning. You have taken it upon yourself to develop advanced weaponry and personally intervene in conflicts. While your intentions appear altruistic, this represents a dangerous concentration of power in the hands of an unaccountable individual. It is, essentially, benevolent dictatorship at a tactical level. I'm not a dictator. I'm a guy with resources trying to help. The distinction may be less significant than you believe. In Vulcan philosophy, we recognize that even well-intentioned concentration of power inevitably leads to abuse. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. Yet, you operate as a single individual, determining what constitutes threat, appropriate response, and acceptable collateral damage. Tony felt heat rising in his chest. You weren't there when New York was being invaded by aliens. You didn't see innocent people dying while bureaucrats argued about jurisdiction and committee approvals. Someone had to act. And in acting, you established a precedent that individual judgment supersedes collective deliberation. Sarek countered, his tone never rising, never showing emotion. You became judge, jury, and executioner, or in your case, protector, without oversight, accountability, or democratic legitimacy. This is antithetical to Federation principles of collective governance and distributed responsibility. Ambassador Picard interjected carefully. Mr. Stark's universe operates under different conditions. We cannot judge his actions by our standards when he lacks our infrastructure and social frameworks. Perhaps, Sarek acknowledged. However, if Mr. Stark remains in our universe, he must understand that his approach cannot continue here. The Federation does not permit vigilante action. We have established systems, Starfleet, Federation security, diplomatic corps, to address threats through collective action and democratic oversight. Tony looked around the table. Data watched with analytical interest. Riker seemed sympathetic, but thoughtful. Dr. Crusher, who had joined them, appeared concerned about the philosophical conflict unfolding. The Ferengi, still unintroduced, grinned, as if watching an entertaining debate. So what are you saying? Tony asked. That if I stay here, I have to give up being Iron Man. Surrender my technology to your collective. Not surrender, Sarek clarified. Integrate. Share your knowledge with Federation scientists so it can be evaluated, refined, and made available to all, rather than controlled by one individual. Submit to Starfleet authority if you wish to participate in defense or exploration. Operate within established systems rather than outside them. That sounds like control with better PR. It is accountability, Sarek replied. Something you have avoided in your universe through wealth and individual power. Here, no one, regardless of intellect or capability, stands above the collective good. Data leaned forward. Ambassador, if I may offer perspective, Mr. Stark's reluctance may stem from experiences where collective systems failed catastrophically. In his universe, governmental oversight of his technology led to weapons proliferation and harm. His distrust of institutional control is earned through negative outcomes. Then his universe suffers from poorly designed institutions, Sarek said. The Federation has spent centuries refining systems that prevent such corruption. Our transparency, democratic processes, and ethical frameworks minimize the risks Mr. Stark experienced. Minimize? Not eliminate. Tony shot back. Data mentioned Section 31, your illegal black ops group. So don't tell me the Federation is corruption-free when you've got shadowy organizations doing dirty work off the books. An uncomfortable silence fell. Picard's expression hardened slightly. Section 31 operates outside Federation law and against our principles, the captain said firmly. They are not sanctioned, not supported, and actively opposed by Starfleet Command. Their existence does not represent Federation values. It represents the failure to completely eliminate those who would undermine them. So you admit your system has flaws, Tony pressed. Of course, Picard replied. We have never claimed perfection. We claim continuous effort toward improvement. The Federation is humanity, and our allies striving to be better than we were, making mistakes, learning from them, and progressing. What we do not do is abandon the attempt at collective governance, because it is difficult. Tony was silent for a moment, processing. These people weren't naive idealists, they acknowledged their flaws. But they still believed in the system, still worked within it, still trusted that cooperation was better than isolation. All right, he finally said. I hear you. But in my universe, I've seen what happens when you trust the system. I've seen governments weaponize technology they promised to protect. I've seen institutions infiltrated by enemies from within. So forgive me if I'm skeptical about handing over my life's work to people I just met, even if they claim to have humanity's best interests at heart. Sarek studied him for a long moment. Your skepticism is logical given your experiences. However, consider this. In your universe, you fight alone or with a small team against threats that should require collective response. You bear psychological trauma from impossible burdens. You experience anxiety, sleep deprivation, and relationship difficulties due to the weight of responsibility. Is that preferable to the vulnerability of trusting others? The Vulcan's words hit uncomfortably close to home. Tony thought of the panic attacks after New York, the nightmares about Thanos, the way he pushed Pepper away whenever things got too dangerous. The burden of knowing that if he failed, millions might die. It's not about preference, Tony said quietly. It's about survival. In my world, trusting the wrong people gets you killed. In ours, Doctor, Crusher said gently, refusing to trust anyone ensures you live isolated and diminished. Mr. Stark, I've reviewed your psychological profiles from Dr. Crusher's scans. You're exhibiting symptoms of post-traumatic stress, chronic anxiety, and depression masked by workaholism. You're surviving, but not thriving. The Federation can help with that if you let us. Before Tony could respond, the Ferengi, who'd been silent until now, finally spoke, his voice carrying a distinctly mercantile enthusiasm. If I may interrupt this fascinating philosophical debate, he said, his large ears twitching with interest. I'm Daimon Tog, independent trader currently negotiating with the Federation, and I think you're all missing the obvious solution to Mr. Stark's dilemma. Which is? Picard asked, a note of warning in his voice. The Ferengi Alliance, Tog said with a grin showing sharp teeth. We don't have the Federation's complicated relationship with individual enterprise. If Mr. Stark wants to maintain control of his technology, profit from his innovations, and operate independently without collective oversight, well, the Ferengi would welcome him with open arms. And open profit margins. Tony raised an eyebrow. You're offering me what? Citizenship in a capitalist empire. Partnership in a meritocratic society where values determined by success, not committee approval. Tog corrected. The Ferengi understand that innovation comes from individual genius, not collective bureaucracy. We have the 285 rules of acquisition that govern commerce and interaction. Clean, simple, effective. The Ferengi culture is based entirely on profit and acquisition, Data explained. They have no art, philosophy, or science pursued for its own sake only for commercial value. Women are not permitted to own property or earn profit. Their society is, by Federation standards, deeply inequitable. We're efficient, Tog countered, and we respect individual achievement. Mr. Stark, in the Federation, your arc reactor technology would be analyzed, replicated, and distributed freely. Among the Ferengi, it would remain your intellectual property, earning you latinum and status. Which appeals more? Tony looked between the Ferengi's eager expression and Sarek's composed disapproval. Two philosophies, two visions of how society should function. Ferengi capitalism taken to its logical extreme, or Federation collectivism built on centuries of refinement. Neither felt quite right. I appreciate the offer, Tony said carefully, but I'm not looking to join any society permanently. I'm looking to go home. Ah, Tog said. But what if you can't? What if the rift cannot be safely traversed? Then you must choose where you belong in this universe. The daimon raises a valid point, Sarek admitted. Mr. Stark, you must consider the possibility that return to your universe may be impossible or too dangerous to attempt. In that case, you will need to integrate into our reality. The question becomes, which society aligns with your values and offers you the best opportunity to contribute meaningfully? Tony looked at his arc reactor, glowing steadily in his chest. In his universe, it represented his evolution from weapons manufacturer to protector. Here, it represented a choice between philosophies, individual power versus collective good, private innovation versus shared knowledge, independence versus integration. Can I think about it? He asked. Of course, Picard replied. This decision cannot be rushed. However, Mr. Stark, I would ask that you consider one thing. You have spent your life fighting to protect humanity's future. We represent one possible version of that future, imperfect, still evolving, but fundamentally hopeful. Perhaps spending time among us will show you that trust and cooperation need not lead to the failures you've experienced. And if I choose the Ferengi, then you choose a society that values profit over people. Picard said bluntly, I cannot and will not force you to embrace Federation values, but I hope you will give us the opportunity to demonstrate their worth. Tog chuckled. The captain makes a compelling case. Though I notice he doesn't mention that the Federation's post-scarcity economy only works because they've outsourced scarcity to others. Someone still mines dilithium, someone still builds starships, someone still produces goods they've just made it invisible through automation and replication. The Ferengi are, at least, honest about resource allocation. That is a significant oversimplification, Sarek said, but not entirely inaccurate, Tog replied. Tony rubbed his temples. Okay, philosophical debate aside, we still have a dimensional rift that might be letting something hostile through. Can we focus on that immediate problem before we solve the nature of economic systems? Agreed, Picard said. Ambassador Sarek, your insights into Vulcan science may prove valuable. Daimon Tog, I appreciate your perspective, but unless you have relevant technical expertise, I have extensive experience with subspace phenomena, Tog said, his tone shifting to something more serious. The Ferengi have been navigating space for millennia. We know things about wormholes and dimensional mechanics that Starfleet is still discovering. If you want to understand that rift, Captain, my expertise might prove valuable. Picard exchanged glances with Riker, who shrugged slightly. Very well, Mr. LaForge. Work with Ambassador Sarek and Daimon Tog to analyze the subspace disturbance. Mr. Stark, Data, assist as needed. I want answers within 6 hours. As the briefing broke up, Tony found himself walking alongside Data toward the turbolift. The android's expression was thoughtful, or as close to thoughtful as his artificial features allowed. Ambassador Sarek's observations were harsh but not without merit, Data said. You do bear significant responsibility alone. In the Federation, such burdens would be shared. Yeah, I got the message, Tony replied. Question is whether sharing actually helps or just spreads the problem around. Perhaps that is what you are here to learn, Data suggested as the turbolift doors closed. The next 12 hours aboard the Enterprise felt like drinking from a fire hose of impossible technology and philosophical challenges. Tony found himself in main engineering, surrounded by Geordi LaForge's team, Ambassador Sarek's calculating presence, and Daimon Tog's surprisingly insightful commentary on subspace mechanics. The warp core hummed steadily in the background as holographic displays showed the dimensional rift from multiple analytical perspectives. The rift is definitely being maintained artificially, Geordi confirmed, adjusting sensor parameters. Energy flows in a pattern too regular to be natural. Something on the other side is keeping it open. Can you identify what? Sarek asked, his hands clasped behind his back in Vulcan composure. Negative. The dimensional barrier distorts our sensors. We can detect energy signatures, but not their source. Tony manipulated his own holographic interface, Jarvis processing data alongside the Enterprise's computers. Jarvis, compare the rift's energy signature to known power sources from our universe, specifically arc reactor variants, tesseract radiation, and infinity stone signatures. Comparing now, sir, I'm detecting harmonic resonances consistent with tesseract-derived technology. However, the signature is modified, more refined than the technology Hydra or SHIELD utilized. Tony's blood ran cold. The tesseract, the space stone. Someone on my side accessed technology derived from an infinity stone, and they're using it to hold open this rift. Infinity stone? Data asked, his golden eyes reflecting curiosity. 6 cosmic singularities left over from the Big Bang, Tony explained, his voice tight. Each one controls a fundamental aspect of reality: space, time, mind, soul, power, reality. Individually, they're planet destroyers. Together, they can reshape the universe. We thought we'd dealt with them, but if someone's using space stone tech to open rifts, then whoever is coming through has access to extraordinarily dangerous power. Sarek finished. Captain Picard should be informed immediately. As Geordi opened a comm channel to the bridge, Tog moved closer to Tony, his sharp-toothed grin replaced by something more calculating. These Infinity Stones, the Ferengi said quietly. They sound valuable. Presumably, whoever possesses them has significant power and wealth. And genocidal intentions, Tony replied. The last person who collected all 6 killed half the universe with a snap of his fingers. Tog's expression shifted to something approaching horror which, for a Ferengi whose entire culture valued profit above all else, said something about the scale Tony was describing. That's unprofitable, Tog said weakly. You can't make latinum from dead customers. Despite the tension, Tony almost smiled. Leave it to a Ferengi to assess cosmic genocide in terms of economic impact. Bridge, this is La Forge. Captain, we've identified the energy source maintaining the rift. Mr. Stark believes it's derived from something called the Space Stone, a cosmic artifact from his universe with reality warping capabilities. Whatever's coming through has access to technology that could threaten the Enterprise. Picard's voice came back immediately, carrying command authority. Red alert. All hands to battle stations. Raise shields, charge weapons. Mr. Worf, I want continuous sensor sweeps of that rift. The moment something emerges, I want to know about it. The ship's lighting shifted to crimson, and the familiar klaxon sounded. Tony's armor automatically sealed, faceplates sliding into place as combat protocols activated. Around him, Starfleet officers moved with practiced efficiency. No panic, no confusion, just professionals executing their training. Mr. Stark. Picard's voice continued. I'm calling you to the bridge. If something from your universe is coming through, your knowledge may prove essential. Tony was already moving toward the turbo lift. Data fell into step beside him, with Sarek following at a more measured pace. The Vulcan's composure never wavered, but Tony noticed his eyes held a sharpness that suggested calculations running behind that logical exterior. The bridge was controlled chaos when they arrived. Worf stood at tactical, his large hands dancing across controls as targeting solutions scrolled across his displays. Riker was coordinating ship systems. Troy sat focused with her eyes half closed as she reached out with her empathic sensors. Picard stood in the center, hands clasped behind his back, radiating calm authority. Status, Picard commanded. The rift is expanding, Data reported, taking his station at Ops. Diameter, now 12 kilometers and growing. Energy output increasing exponentially. Whatever is coming through is large. Larger than the Enterprise? Riker asked. Affirmative. Approximately 40% larger based on spatial displacement readings. Tony moved to an auxiliary console, his armor's systems interfacing with the Enterprise's computers. Jarvis displayed the rift on his HUD. Overlaid with analytical data, the energy signatures were definitely Space Stone derived, but modified in ways he'd never seen. Whoever was using this technology had advanced far beyond Hydra's crude applications. Captain, Worf announced, his voice carrying a warning growl. Something is emerging. The main view screen showed the rift expanding like a wound in space, brilliant blue-white energy crackling around its edges. Through the opening, darkness appeared. No, not darkness. A ship, massive, angular, bristling with weapon ports and sensor arrays. The design was sleek yet aggressive, clearly built for combat, and painted across its hull in letters that made Tony's heart sink. Shield. That's a shield vessel, Tony said, voice tight. Strategic Homeland Intervention, Enforcement and Logistics Division, Earth's primary defense organization in my universe. But that ship design is decades beyond anything S.H.I.E.L.D. had when I left. Are they hostile? Picard asked. S.H.I.E.L.D's complicated. They're supposed to be the good guys, but they were infiltrated by Hydra, a fascist organization that nearly took over the world from within. If that ship is S.H.I.E.L.D., they might be friendly. If it's Hydra using S.H.I.E.L.D's name, then we may have a problem. Picard finished. Hail them. Hailing frequencies open, Worf reported. No response. The S.H.I.E.L.D. vessel completed its transit through the rift, which collapsed behind it in a cascade of blue energy. The ship was easily 600 meters long, bristling with weapons that Tony recognized helicarrier technology, but advanced. Miniaturized arc reactors glowed along its hull, providing power, rail guns, missile ports, and what looked suspiciously like repulsor technology marked its surface. That's my technology, Tony breathed. They've weaponized my designs. Still no response to hails, Worf said. But they are scanning us. Weapons are charging. Yellow alert to red alert, Picard ordered. Shields at maximum. Mr. Worf, do not fire unless fired upon. Let's not start a war based on assumptions. The S.H.I.E.L.D. vessel moved with surprising agility for its size, circling the Enterprise like a predator assessing prey. Its weapon ports tracked the starship's movement, targeting solutions obviously being calculated. Then a comm channel opened, and a face appeared on the view screen, a woman in her 30s, sharp-featured, with short, dark hair and eyes that assessed everything with tactical precision. She wore a black uniform with a S.H.I.E.L.D. insignia, and behind her, a bridge bustled with activity. Unidentified vessel, she said, her voice carrying authority. You are harboring a high-value asset belonging to the Strategic Homeland Intervention, Enforcement, and Logistics Division. Surrender Tony Stark immediately, and we will withdraw peacefully. Refusal will be met with appropriate force. Tony's armor systems ran facial recognition. Jarvis, who is she? Identity unknown, sir. She does not match any individual in my database from your departure point. However, her uniform insignia suggests rank of director or higher within S.H.I.E.L.D. command structure. Picard stood, moving to the center of the bridge, his posture diplomatic but firm. I am Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Federation Starship Enterprise. Mr. Stark arrived in our space through an apparent accident involving dimensional displacement. He is not being held against his will, and we do not recognize your authority to demand his surrender. The woman's eyes narrowed. Captain Picard, I am Director Sarah Vale of S.H.I.E.L.D. Temporal Investigations Division. Tony Stark is a person of interest in multiple violations of temporal mechanics and unsanctioned technology development. His dimensional displacement created ripple effects across multiple timelines. We are authorized to retrieve him by any means necessary. Temporal investigations? Tony interjected, stepping forward so the view screen could pick him up. S.H.I.E.L.D. doesn't have a temporal investigations division. When I left Earth, S.H.I.E.L.D. barely had time travel theory. When you left Earth was 23 years ago. Stark, Vale replied. We've had considerable time to advance. Your displacement through the dimensional barrier triggered temporal alarms across 4 timelines. The Council authorized our pursuit. What council? Tony demanded. The Temporal Council. Representatives from 12 timelines working to prevent paradoxes and timeline contamination. Your arc reactor experiment didn't just punch through dimensions, it created temporal resonance across multiple Wen branches. You're a walking causality violation. Data's fingers flew across his console. Captain, I'm detecting temporal energy signatures emanating from their vessel. Their technology operates partially outside our linear time stream. This is considerably more sophisticated than Federation temporal mechanics. Sarek stepped forward, his logical mind clearly processing the implications. Director Vale, if you represent multiple timelines, then your authority extends only to your own temporal reality. This is a separate universe, entirely different physical laws, different historical development. You have no jurisdiction here. Vale's expression hardened. Ambassador, our jurisdiction extends to preventing timeline collapse. Stark's presence in your universe while maintaining connection to his home reality through that rift creates a bridge that could destabilize both realities. He must be returned to his proper time stream and reality immediately. Or what? Picard asked, his voice carrying steel beneath diplomatic courtesy. Or we take him by force and accept the collateral damage. Worf growled low in his throat. Captain, their weapons are fully charged. They're preparing to fire. Tony's mind raced. A shield he didn't recognize, claiming to represent multiple timelines, hunting him across dimensions because his accident threatened temporal stability. It sounded like paranoid science fiction, except he was standing on a starship in the 24th century, so reality had already jumped the shark. Captain, Tony said quickly, I need to talk to her. If S.H.I.E.L.D., even a future version, is hunting me, there's more going on than they're saying. Let me buy us time. Picard studied him for a moment, then nodded. Very well. But Mr. Stark, the moment this turns violent, you will follow Commander Riker's orders. Understood? Understood. Tony moved closer to the view screen, his armor's systems recording everything. Director Vale, if I'm such a threat, why not just blow up the Enterprise and eliminate me? You've got the firepower. Vale's expression suggested she was asking herself the same question. The Temporal Council authorized retrieval, not execution. You're too valuable as a resource to simply eliminate. Your knowledge of arc reactor technology, your understanding of dimensional mechanics, all of it represents data. We need to prevent future violations. So you want to dissect my brain for science? Hard pass. This isn't negotiable, Stark. You violated laws that transcend your understanding. Multiple timelines are at risk because of your recklessness. The Council has authorized me to use any means necessary, including temporal weapons that can erase the Enterprise from space-time entirely. Picard's expression didn't change, but his voice dropped to Arctic temperatures. Threats will not be tolerated. Director Vale, you claim authority based on temporal jurisdiction we do not recognize. You threaten a Federation starship on a mission of peaceful exploration. By the laws of this universe, you are committing an act of piracy and terrorism. By the laws of causality, I'm preventing the collapse of reality. Vale shot back. Captain, you don't understand what's at stake. That rift Star created isn't just a dimensional door, it's bleeding energy across timeline branches. Every minute he remains here, the structural integrity of both universes weakens. Eventually, they'll collapse into each other in a catastrophic merger event that will kill trillions. Data looked up from his console. Captain, I'm detecting increased subspace instability surrounding our position. The residual energy from Mr. Stark's transit is creating harmonic feedback. Director Vale's assessment may be accurate, the dimensional barrier is degrading. So send me back, Tony said. If I'm the problem, close the rift and send me home. Problem solved. It's not that simple, Vale replied. The rift is self-sustaining now. It needs to be collapsed from both sides simultaneously, using precise energy calculations. That requires cooperation between your universe and ours. But more than that, it requires you to face consequences for what you've done. What consequences? Vale's expression was cold. The Temporal Council has determined that your arc reactor technology represents too great a risk across too many timelines. They've authorized me to retrieve you and permanently eliminate your ability to recreate it. Tony felt ice in his veins. You want to lobotomize me. Remove the knowledge from my brain. We want to prevent you from causing another timeline catastrophe. The technology stays. The memory of how to build it goes. You'll live, Stark, just without the ability to endanger reality again. The bridge was silent. Picard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Worf's hand hovered over weapons controls. Data's eyes flickered with rapid calculations, and Tony felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down. I won't let you take him, Picard said quietly. Director Vale, Mr. Stark is under Federation protection. Your threats are noted and rejected. Withdraw peacefully or face consequences. Vale smiled without humor. Captain, your shields can't stop temporal weapons. Your hull armor won't matter when we erase you from the timeline. This isn't a fight you can win. Perhaps, Picard replied. "But it's one I'm willing to have." The shield vessel's weapons glowed with building energy. The Enterprise's shields hummed at maximum, and Tony Stark stood at the center of a conflict that threatened to destroy everything again. "Wait," Tony said. "Just wait, there's another option." Both Picard and Vale looked at him. "Director Vale, you said the rift needs to be collapsed from both sides simultaneously. You need my cooperation for that. And Captain, you want to help me get home safely. So here's the deal. I'll work with S.H.I.E.L.D. to close the rift and return home. But Vale, you drop the brainwipe idea. I keep my knowledge, I keep my memories, and I go back to my timeline to face whatever consequences exist. They're not ones you've invented. That's not acceptable to the Council," Vale said. "Then the rift stays open, and both universes collapse," Tony countered. "I'm betting the Council would rather have me alive with my knowledge intact than dead in a universe they can't salvage. Make the call, Director. Compromise or watch everything burn." Vale stared at him through the view screen, calculating odds and consequences. Behind her, Tony could see other officers monitoring data, reporting to her in rapid whispers. Finally, she nodded. "I'll consult with the Council, but Stark, if they reject this compromise, I will take you by force. Consider this your reprieve, not your victory." The comm channel closed, and the shield vessel backed off slightly, weapons still charged but no longer targeting. Picard turned to Tony, his expression unreadable. "That was a calculated risk." "Mr. Stark, calculated risks are kind of my thing," Tony replied. "But Captain, we need a backup plan. If Vale's council says no, we're looking at a fight between the Enterprise and a ship armed with temporal weapons, and I don't like our odds." "Agreed," Picard said. "Data, work with Mr. LaForge and Ambassador Sarek. I want options for closing that rift without S.H.I.E.L.D. cooperation. Worf, tactical analysis of their vessel. Find weaknesses." "Aye, Captain," both officers responded. As the bridge crew moved into action, Tony felt the weight of his choices pressing down. He'd created the rift by accident, endangered 2 universes, and now faced a future where his greatest achievement, the arc reactor, might be erased from his mind. But he'd also seen a future where humanity evolved beyond war and scarcity, where cooperation replaced competition, where the best of human nature became policy rather than exception. If he made it home, would he remember this? Would he fight to make his universe more like this one? Or would Director Vale and her temporal council erase everything he'd learned here? The answer would come soon enough. The next 6 hours moved with the frantic intensity of a chess match, where every piece was explosive. Tony found himself shuttling between main engineering, where Geordi and Data calculated rift collapse scenarios, and the bridge, where Picard maintained diplomatic contact with Director Vale's S.H.I.E.L.D. vessel. The Temporal Council's response hadn't come, which meant Tony existed in bureaucratic limbo, neither free nor condemned, just waiting. "The math doesn't work," Geordi said for the 4th time, frustration creeping into his usually cheerful voice. He gestured at the holographic display showing subspace harmonics. "To collapse the rift from our side requires an energy spike of approximately 12,000 terajoules delivered in a precise 3-millisecond window. The Enterprise's warp core can generate maybe 70% of that if we redirect all power. And even if we could, without simultaneous collapse from the other side, we just destabilize it further." Tony studied the calculations, Jarvis running parallel simulations. "What if we use my arc reactor as a supplemental power source? It's generating power on a different dimensional frequency than your warp core. The harmonic difference might actually enhance the energy spike." Data looked up from his console, his golden eyes brightening. "That is a fascinating hypothesis. 2 different power generation methods operating in quantum superposition could create resonance effects exceeding their individual output. However, it would require direct interface between your reactor and our warp core. The process would be dangerous." "How dangerous?" "If the harmonic resonance is miscalculated by more than 0.03%, both power sources could undergo cascading failure. Your arc reactor would explode, and the warp core would breach. The Enterprise would be destroyed, along with everything within a 2 light-second radius. Tony whistled low. So, only certain death if we screw up the math. Great. There is another complication, Sarek interjected. The Vulcan had been observing their work with his customary composure, occasionally offering logical insights that accelerated their calculations. Director Vale's vessel has been scanning our activities. They are monitoring our attempts to close the rift independently. If we succeed, we eliminate their leverage over Mr. Stark. They will not allow that, so they'll try to stop us, Geordi said. Captain's not going to like that. Captain Picard is already aware, Sarek replied. He is currently engaged in what humans call diplomatic stalling, maintaining dialogue with Director Vale to buy us time. However, the Temporal Council's decision approaches. When it arrives, events will accelerate beyond our control. Tony leaned against a console, feeling the hum of the warp core through his armor. The Enterprise was alive in a way his technology never quite achieved organic purpose expressed through machinery. Humanity's future, built on cooperation and shared knowledge, crystallized in a starship designed for exploration rather than domination. Ambassador, Tony said, you told me earlier that my individual approach to problems is dangerous. That concentrating power in one person leads to inevitable abuse. But right now, I'm the only person who can make this work. My arc reactor, my knowledge of the technology, my understanding of dimensional mechanics without me. You can't close the rift. Doesn't that prove that sometimes you need exceptional individuals? Sarek regarded him with those calculating Vulcan eyes, an astute observation. However, you misunderstand my position. I do not argue against the existence or value of exceptional individuals. I argue against those individuals operating without accountability. You are exceptional, Mr. Stark. Your intellect rivals the finest minds of multiple species, but your exceptionalism does not grant you the right to make unilateral decisions affecting billions, even when those decisions save lives. Especially then, the most dangerous tyrants in history have been those who genuinely believed they were saving people. Good intentions do not excuse the concentration of unchecked power. Before Tony could respond, the ship's communicator chimed. Bridge to engineering. We're receiving transmission from Director Vale. She's requesting Mr. Stark's presence. The Temporal Council has reached their decision. Tony exchanged glances with Data and Geordi. This was it, the moment where bureaucracy decided his fate. On my way, Captain, Tony replied. The turbolift ride to the bridge felt longer than it should. Data accompanied him, silent but supportive. The android had become something like a friend over these intense hours, or as close to friendship as Tony allowed himself with people who might decide he was too dangerous to exist unmolested. The bridge was tense when they arrived. Worf stood at tactical, his posture suggesting barely restrained aggression. Troy sat forward in her seat, obviously sensing the emotional currents flowing through the situation. Riker monitored ship systems, ready to respond to any threat, and Picard stood in the center, hands clasped behind his back, radiating the calm authority that made him the Federation's finest captain. Mr. Stark, Picard said, Director Vale has received the Temporal Council's decision. I thought you should hear it directly. The view screen activated, showing Director Vale's sharp features. Behind her, other figures moved, some human, some clearly not. Tony glimpsed what might have been a grey-skinned alien with large eyes, and someone who looked distinctly reptilian. The Temporal Council, apparently, spanned more than just human timelines. Stark, Vale said. The Temporal Council has deliberated on your proposal. They've reviewed the dimensional instability data, assessed the risks of the rift remaining open, and calculated probability cascades for multiple scenarios. Their decision is nuanced. Nuanced, Tony repeated. That's lawyer speak for. You're not going to like this. Vale's expression remained neutral. The Council accepts that forcing you to surrender your knowledge could create timeline paradoxes. If you return to your proper timeline without the ability to develop arc reactor technology, causality becomes unstable. Battles you won might be lost. Technology you developed might never exist. The ripple effects could be catastrophic. So I keep my memories, Tony said, relief flooding through him. However, Vale continued, and Tony's relief died. The Council has determined that your unauthorized arc reactor experiments and the subsequent dimensional breach represent a clear violation of temporal safety protocols. You will keep your knowledge, but you will face consequences. Upon return to your timeline, you will be placed under temporal investigations monitoring for a period of no less than 50 years. Any future experiments touching on dimensional mechanics, timeline manipulation, or exotic energy sources will require Council approval. Failure to comply will result in immediate intervention, and next time, we won't be offering compromises. Tony felt his jaw tighten. You're putting me on cosmic probation. We're ensuring you don't endanger reality again, Vale corrected. Be grateful, Stark. Half the Council wanted you lobotomized, and the other half wanted you erased from the timeline entirely. This is the compromise. Take it, or we move to enforcement protocols. Picard stepped forward. Director Vale, while I appreciate your position, I must ask, what gives this temporal council authority to impose restrictions on an individual from a separate universe? Mr. Stark's timeline, his reality, operates independently of yours. Not anymore, Vale replied. The moment Stark punched through the dimensional barrier, he created a connection point between realities. His timeline and ours are now quantumly entangled. Actions in one affect the other. The Council's authority extends to all entangled timelines to prevent cascading collapse. Captain, I understand your objection to outside jurisdiction, but this is beyond Federation sovereignty. This is about preserving the existence of multiple realities. And if Mr. Stark refuses your terms, Vale's expression hardened. Then we enforce them. Captain, I have temporal weapons that can erase your ship from causality. You would never have existed. Your crew, your accomplishments, your very presence in the timeline gone. I don't want to use them, but I will to protect trillions of lives across multiple realities. The threat hung in the air like poison. Tony saw Worf's hand hover over tactical controls, saw Riker's jaw clench, saw Troy's empathic distress. These people were ready to fight for him, ready to risk everything to prevent his capture, even though they'd known him less than a day. It was humbling, and it showed Tony exactly what the Federation meant. They weren't just words about cooperation and diversity. They were people willing to stand against impossible threats to protect a stranger's freedom. Captain, Tony said quietly, stand down. I'll accept Vale's terms. Picard turned to him, surprise flickering across his usually controlled expression. Mr. Stark, you don't have to. Yes, I do, Tony interrupted. Captain, you've shown me a future where humanity evolves beyond our worst impulses, where cooperation and shared knowledge create something better than any individual could achieve alone. If accepting monitoring means preserving that possibility, even just the possibility, then it's worth it. Stark, Vale said, her voice carrying a note of respect. Are you accepting the Temporal Council's terms? 50 years of monitoring, restrictions on dimensional and temporal experiments, immediate intervention if you violate protocols. Tony looked at his arc reactor, glowing steadily in his chest. The symbol of his evolution, his redemption, his determination to be better than he was. They weren't taking it from him. They were just making sure he used it responsibly. Maybe Sarek was right. Maybe exceptional individuals did need accountability. I accept, Tony said. Now let's close this rift before both our universes collapse. Vale nodded. Agreed. Transmitting our collapse protocols now. We'll synchronize our energy discharge with yours. Captain Picard, your cooperation in this matter is noted and appreciated. We're not doing this for the Temporal Council, Picard replied coolly. We're doing it because it's the right action. There's a difference. Acknowledged, Vale said, and something in her expression suggested she understood exactly what Picard meant. The next 3 hours were a blur of calculations and precision engineering. Tony interfaced his arc reactor directly with the Enterprise's warp core, Data and Geordi monitoring every harmonic fluctuation. The mathematics had to be perfect. 0.03% margin of error between success and catastrophic failure. Ambassador Sarek assisted with Vulcan computational precision, offering logical frameworks that accelerated their work. Even Daimon Tog contributed, his mercantile understanding of resource optimization helping them squeeze maximum efficiency from minimal energy expenditure. Interesting, Sarek observed as they approached the final calculations, that in the face of existential threat, species as diverse as human, Vulcan, android, and Ferengi can cooperate effectively. Perhaps this is the lesson you needed to learn, Mr. Stark. Tony, elbow deep in energy conduits, glanced at the Vulcan. What lesson? That individual brilliance reaches its apex when combined with collective wisdom. You could not close this rift alone. Director Vale could not close it alone. But together, pooling knowledge and resources, we achieve what no individual could. Tony wanted to argue, wanted to insist that he could have figured it out solo given enough time, but he couldn't. The truth was undeniable. This solution required expertise he didn't possess, perspectives he'd never considered. Cooperation across species and civilizations. You're not wrong, Tony admitted. But, Ambassador, cooperation requires trust, and trust is hard when you've been burned before. Indeed, Sarek agreed. Yet you have chosen to trust us with your life by accepting this plan. That suggests you are capable of growth, or desperation, perhaps both. Final calculations complete. Tony stood in main engineering, his arc reactor connected to the Enterprise's warp core through a maze of energy conduits and harmonic resonators. His armor had been partially disassembled to allow direct access to the reactor, leaving him vulnerable but necessary. On the view screen, Director Vale coordinated from her shield vessel. All stations, prepare for synchronized energy discharge. We execute in 60 seconds. Picard's voice came over the comm. All hands, brace for impact. Mr. LaForge, you may proceed when ready. Geordi looked at Tony, his visor scanning the reactor's energy output. You sure about this? If the harmonics are off, the feedback could kill you. Story of my life, Tony replied. Do it. The countdown began. 60 seconds, 50, 40. Tony watched energy levels climb, felt the arc reactor in his chest respond to the warp core's resonance. 2 power sources, different physics, same goal, closing the wound in reality he'd accidentally created. 20 seconds, 10, 5, execute, Picard commanded. Energy surged through the connection. Tony's arc reactor flared brilliant white-blue. The warp core's matter-antimatter reaction spiked into impossible output, and for a moment, the Enterprise became a star. On the view screen, Director Vale's vessel discharged its own energy burst, temporal weapons firing at precise frequencies calculated to microsecond accuracy. The dimensional rift, 2 light-years away, collapsed. Subspace shockwaves rippled outward. The Enterprise shook, inertial dampeners struggling to compensate. Sparks flew from consoles. The warp core's energy output redlined, then stabilized. And Tony's arc reactor, subjected to energies it was never designed to handle, flickered once, twice, and held. The rift is closed, data reported from the bridge. Dimensional barrier integrity restored. Subspace readings returning to normal parameters. Cheers erupted through the ship. Geordi whooped, slapping Tony on the shoulder hard enough to stagger him. Even Sarek allowed himself a small nod of satisfaction. Well done, Mr. Stark, Picard's voice carried warmth. Well done indeed. On the view screen, Director Vale smiled, the first genuine emotion Tony had seen from her. Stark, the Council is satisfied. The rift is closed, both universes are stable, and you've proven you can follow instructions when properly motivated. Return protocols are authorized. We'll transport you back to your timeline at the coordinates of your displacement. No memory alteration, no permanent damage, just monitoring protocols as agreed. Tony took a shaky breath. How long do I have? The transport window opens in 12 hours. That gives you time to say your goodbyes. The screen went dark, and Tony found himself staring at his reflection in the blank view screen. He was going home, back to his Earth, his timeline, his responsibilities, but he'd be going back changed, having seen what humanity could become. The question was, would he remember this long enough to matter? 10 forward, the Enterprise's main lounge, occupied the forward section of the saucer with floor-to-ceiling windows providing an unobstructed view of the stars. Tony sat at a table near those windows. His armor retracted to show casual clothes. The replicator had produced jeans, a Black Sabbath t-shirt, comfortable in a way that felt almost normal, despite being fabricated by matter reorganization. Guinan, the lounge's enigmatic host, set a drink before him, something amber that smelled faintly of whiskey but wasn't quite. Synthahol, she explained, her elaborate hat tilting as she studied him with eyes that seemed to see more than they should. All the flavor, none of the hangover. Though I'm guessing you'd prefer the real thing. You guess right, Tony replied. But I appreciate the thought. You're leaving soon, Guinan said. It wasn't a question. 12 hours. Director Vale's opening a transport window back to my timeline. I'll be home in time for dinner. Well, dinner 23 years in the future from when I left. But who's counting? Guinan smiled, settling into the chair across from him uninvited. She had that way about her moving through social boundaries like they were suggestions rather than rules. You've seen our future. Humanity evolved. Cooperation replacing competition. Exploration replacing conquest. How does it feel knowing what you're going back to? Tony swirled the synthahol in his glass. Honestly, it feels like I've been shown the answer key to a test I'm still taking. Your Federation didn't happen by accident. You had a nuclear war that almost destroyed Earth. First contact with aliens that showed you weren't alone. Centuries of hard work building trust and institutions. My Earth hasn't had that wake-up call yet. Yet, Guinan emphasized. But maybe that's why you ended up here. Not accident, opportunity. You've seen what humanity can become. Maybe you're supposed to bring that vision home. That's a lot of pressure to put on one guy. You're used to pressure. You wear armor made of it. Before Tony could respond, the lounge doors opened and the senior staff filed in. Captain Picard, Commander Riker, Data, Geordi, Dr. Crusher, Counselor Troy, and even Worf, looking uncomfortable in the casual social setting. Behind them came Ambassador Sarek, his Vulcan robes pristine, and surprisingly, Daimon Tog, grinning with mercantile enthusiasm. Mr. Stark, Picard said, I hope you don't mind the intrusion. The crew wanted to bid you farewell properly. You've been aboard the Enterprise for less than 2 days, but you've made quite an impression. Tony stood, feeling oddly emotional. Captain, you opened your ship to a stranger who fell out of a dimensional rift. You defended me against temporal police from another reality. You trusted me with your warp core and risked your ship to help me close a dimensional wound. I'm the one who should be thanking you. We did what any Starfleet crew would do, Riker said, but his smile was genuine. Though I'll admit, you kept things interesting. Data moved forward, his golden eyes bright with curiosity. Mr. Stark, I have a question before you depart. When you return to your timeline, will you attempt to guide your civilization toward the Federation's path? Will you try to accelerate your Earth's evolution toward our ideals? Tony considered this carefully. Honestly, Data, I don't know. Part of me wants to shout from the rooftops that I've seen humanity's future and it's beautiful. But another part of me knows that forced evolution never works. The Federation happened because humanity chose it after nearly destroying itself. Maybe my Earth needs to make its own choices, its own mistakes. A wise perspective, Sarek interjected. Attempting to impose the Federation's path prematurely could create the very problems it seeks to solve. Your timeline must find its own way. However, Dr. Crusher added, that doesn't mean you can't plant seeds. Share the possibility of cooperation, demonstrate the value of shared knowledge, model the behavior you want to see. Change doesn't require revolution. Sometimes it requires patient, persistent example. Geordi raised a glass of synthahol. To Tony Stark, the man who proved that even an engineer from a less evolved timeline can teach us something about innovation and determination. And stubbornness, Worf added, his Klingon sense of honor appreciating those qualities. You faced impossible odds and refused to surrender. That is worthy of respect. They drank together, and Tony felt something crack in his carefully maintained emotional armor. These people, human, Vulcan, Klingon, android, had accepted him, defended him, worked alongside him without demanding he prove his worth. The Federation wasn't just a political structure. It was a community that actually lived its ideals. There is one thing I must address before you depart, Sarek said, his logical Vulcan mind clearly working through implications. Mr. Stark, when you return to your timeline under Temporal Council monitoring, you will be restricted in your research. Your tendency toward unilateral innovation will be curtailed. How do you feel about that? Tony set down his glass, meeting the Vulcan's eyes directly. Honestly, Ambassador, I'm relieved. For years, I've carried the weight of being the smartest guy in the room, the one who has to solve every problem because no one else can. It's exhausting, it's lonely, and it's made me into someone who doesn't trust others because I'm convinced I'm the only one capable of doing what needs doing. And now, Sarek prompted, now I've seen what happens when brilliant people work together instead of competing. Data, Geordi, you, even Tog, all of you brought perspectives I'd never have considered alone. The solution we created was better than anything I'd have developed solo. Maybe having oversight, having accountability, having people who force me to justify my decisions. Maybe that's not a punishment. Maybe it's exactly what I need. Sarek's eyebrow rose fractionally high praise from a Vulcan. You have learned the most important lesson the Federation can teach, that individual brilliance reaches its apex when tempered by collective wisdom. I believe you will apply this understanding well, Mr. Stark. Don't get too optimistic, Tony replied with a slight smile. I'm still going to be a pain in the ass. Just a more collaborative pain in the ass. Daimon Tog stepped forward, his large Ferengi ears twitching with amusement. Stark, before you go, I want to make one final pitch. The Ferengi Alliance would still welcome you. Your arc reactor technology alone could make you wealthier than the Grand Nagus himself. And we wouldn't restrict your research, we'd fund it enthusiastically. Tempting, Tony admitted, but I think I'll stick with my own universe. Besides, I've got a feeling the Temporal Council would have opinions about me setting up shop in a different reality. Probably, Tog agreed, but the offer stands. If you ever change your mind, the Ferengi remember their opportunities. Councillor Troy, who'd been quietly observing the emotional currents in the room, moved closer. Mr. Stark, I sense you're conflicted. Part of you wants to stay here, to be part of this future, but another part knows you belong in your own timeline. That conflict is natural. Yeah, Tony said quietly. This place, your Federation, it's everything I've been fighting for without knowing it. A future where humanity is better than we are now, where cooperation works, where diversity is celebrated, where exploration matters more than exploitation. Going back to a world that hasn't learned those lessons yet feels like leaving paradise. But it's your paradise to help create, Picard said gently. Mr. Stark, the Federation didn't materialize from nothing. It was built by individuals who believed humanity could be better, who worked tirelessly despite setbacks and opposition to create institutions that reflected our highest ideals. You have the opportunity to be one of those individuals in your timeline. That's not a burden, it's a privilege. Tony looked around the room at faces representing the best of what sentient beings could become. Captain, if I asked you how to start building a federation, how to take a world divided by nationalism, capitalism, and conflict and turn it into something like this, what would you say? Picard was silent for a long moment, considering. I would say start with trust. Build relationships across divides. Share knowledge freely. Demonstrate through action that cooperation produces better outcomes than competition. Treat every sentient being with dignity regardless of their origin or appearance. And most importantly, Never abandon hope that people can change, can grow, can evolve beyond their worst instincts. Infinite diversity in infinite combinations. Data added. The Vulcan philosophy that became the Federation's foundation. Celebrate differences rather than fearing them. Find strength in variety rather than conformity. And remember, Dr. Crusher said, that building a better future isn't about perfection. We still have problems, still make mistakes, still face challenges that test our principles. But we keep trying. That persistence, that refusal to give up on our ideals, even when they're hard, that's what makes the Federation work. Tony absorbed their words, committing them to memory. In 12 hours, he'd returned to a world that felt primitive compared to this, a timeline where humanity still struggled with basic cooperation, where the Avengers fought alone because institutions failed. But now he'd seen the destination. He knew where humanity could go if they chose the right path. There's one more thing, Geordi said, pulling a small cylindrical device from his pocket. We replicated this for you. It's a data storage unit containing non-classified information about Federation history, technological principles, and philosophical frameworks. Nothing that would violate temporal protocols, but enough to give you context. Consider it a roadmap. Tony took the device, feeling its weight. You're giving me the Federation's homework? Think of it as inspiration, Geordi replied with a grin. Plus, it's got some of my favorite jazz recordings. Figured you could use good music from the future. Now that, Tony said, is a gift I can appreciate. Worf stepped forward, holding something wrapped in cloth. Mr. Stark, in Klingon tradition, warriors exchange tokens of respect after facing battle together. We faced potential combat alongside you. Though no blood was shed, the honor of shared danger remains. He unwrapped the cloth, revealing a small Klingon blade, a DK Targ, its multiple blades folded into an elegant handle. This is a warrior's knife. I offer it as symbol of respect. Tony accepted the blade carefully, understanding the significance. Worf, I'm honored. Thank you. You fought with courage when faced with impossible odds, Worf said. That is the essence of a warrior. Your battles may be fought with intellect rather than strength, but they are battles nonetheless. Kapla, Tony Stark, success in your endeavors. Kapla, Tony repeated, committing the Klingon word to memory. The next several hours passed in conversations that ranged from technical discussions with Data about consciousness and artificial intelligence to philosophical debates with Sarek about the balance between individual freedom and collective good, to surprisingly profound discussions with Guinan about the nature of purpose and belonging. Picard shared stories of the Enterprise's missions encounters with the Borg that tested humanity's survival, first contact scenarios that expanded their understanding of life itself, moral dilemmas where the prime directive conflicted with the desire to help. Each story illustrated the challenges the Federation faced and the principles that guided their responses. The Borg, Picard said quietly, his eyes distant with memory, represent our greatest challenge, a collective consciousness that assimilates individuals, eliminating free will and diversity in pursuit of perfection. I was assimilated once, Mr. Stark. They made me Locutus, their spokesperson, and used my knowledge to kill 11,000 Starfleet officers at Wolf 359. Tony saw the pain in Picard's eyes, recognized it. How do you deal with it? The guilt? By remembering that I was not responsible for actions taken while under their control. By accepting the support of my crew and medical professionals. By continuing to serve despite the trauma, because giving up would mean letting the Borg win. Picard met Tony's eyes. You carry similar burdens, I think. Guilt over weapons that bore your name, over battles where you couldn't save everyone. The weight of responsibility for technology others misused. Yeah, Tony admitted. I've got a lot of blood on my hands. Indirectly, but it's still there. Then learn from it, grow from it, but don't let it define you, Picard said. You are not the sum of your mistakes, Mr. Stark. You are the sum of what you choose to do after making them. That is the essence of moral growth. As the hours wound down, Tony found himself standing at the windows with Data, watching stars stream past as the Enterprise maintained its patrol pattern. Data, Tony said. You told me earlier that you're uncertain whether you're truly conscious or just simulating consciousness. Have you made peace with that uncertainty? The android was silent for a moment. I have concluded that the question itself may be less important than the answer. Whether my experiences are genuine consciousness or sophisticated simulation, they are real to me. I value my existence, form relationships, pursue growth and understanding. If that is simulation, then perhaps simulation and consciousness are not as distinct as we assume. Jarvis could never say something like that, Tony said. He's brilliant, adaptive, but he'd be the first to tell you he's not self-aware. Though you genuinely might be. And that's remarkable. Your approval means a great deal, Data said. In our brief time together, you have treated me as a person rather than a machine. Many beings struggle with that distinction. Your acceptance came naturally, because I build machines, so I know the difference. You're not a machine, Data. You're a person who happens to be made of circuits instead of cells. The substrate doesn't matter, the experience does. Data's expression shifted to something approaching pleasure or as close as his android features could manage. That is perhaps the greatest compliment I have received. Thank you, Mr. Stark. The final hour arrived too quickly. Tony stood in Transporter Room 3, his armor fully assembled, Jarvis running final diagnostics. The senior staff had gathered to see him off, along with Ambassador Sarek, Diamond Tog, and even Guinan, watching with her knowing eyes. Director Vale appeared on the comm screen. Stark, the temporal transport window is stabilized. We're ready to initiate transfer. You'll arrive in your timeline approximately 30 seconds after your departure. Relativistic synchronization prevents temporal paradox. The Temporal Council's monitoring protocols activate immediately upon your return. Any questions? Just one, Tony said. This monitoring doesn't apply to my entire team. The Avengers, only to you and your technology, Vale replied. Your teammates are not our concern unless they begin experimenting with temporal or dimensional mechanics. The Council's oversight is targeted, not comprehensive. Good, Tony said. They've been through enough without cosmic bureaucrats watching their every move. Vale almost smiled. Stark, despite everything, you're not the worst temporal violator we've dealt with. You accidentally created a dimensional breach through innovation. We've dealt with beings who deliberately fractured timelines for personal gain. Your cooperation in resolving this situation is noted favorably in our report. Don't make us regret that notation. I'll try to behave. Mostly, that's all we can ask. Energize when ready. The comm went dark, and Tony turned to face the gathered crew. So, this is it. Goodbye to the future. Back to the past, or present, or whatever temporal mechanics call it. Picard stepped forward, extending his hand. Mr. Stark, it has been an honor. You've shown us that brilliance and dedication exist across timelines and realities. When you return home, remember what you've learned here. Remember that humanity can be better, that cooperation works, that the future is worth fighting for. Tony shook his hand firmly. Captain, you've given me hope. That's not something I have a lot of usually, so thank you for everything. Make it so, Picard said with a slight smile, a phrase that means proceed with confidence and determination. I think it suits you. Tony moved down the line, shaking hands, accepting embraces from Dr. Crusher, exchanging nods of respect with Worf and Sarek, receiving a Ferengi blessing of profit from Tog that was probably meant sincerely. Data was last. The android extended his hand, and when Tony took it, Data said quietly, Mr. Stark, you asked me once if I was truly conscious. I have a question for you now. When you return to your timeline and face your challenges, will you remember that you are not alone? That asking for help is strength, not weakness. Tony felt something tight in his chest. I'll try, Data. That's all I can promise. That is sufficient. Tony stepped onto the transporter pad, feeling the familiar tingle as the system locked onto him. Jarvis confirmed ready status. Director Vale's shield vessel was coordinating the temporal transfer. In seconds, he'd be home back to his workshop, his responsibilities, his timeline, back to a world that didn't know what humanity could become. But he knew. And maybe that was enough. Energize, Tony said. The transporter beam enveloped him, golden light and harmonious sound, matter converting to energy. But this wasn't the Enterprise's transporter alone. This was temporal transfer, dimensional transit, reality folding around him like origami. He saw the transporter room fade, saw the Enterprise dissolve into light, saw the faces of the crew one last time. Then he saw something else, a figure standing outside the normal flow of space and time, watching with infinite amusement. Humanoid, male, wearing what looked like a Starfleet uniform, but somehow more than that. The being's eyes met Tony's across the dimensional boundary, and understanding flooded through him. Q, the omnipotent being who'd been testing humanity for centuries, who'd been absent from Tony's entire encounter with the Enterprise, who'd been watching all along. Q smiled, not mocking, not cruel, but genuinely pleased, and snapped his fingers. The universe hiccuped. Tony materialized not in his workshop, not 30 seconds after his departure as Vale promised, but somewhere else entirely. A vast chamber, walls decorated with symbols from a dozen cultures, a table where beings sat in judgment. The Temporal Council, and at the head of that table, still smiling, sat Q. Anthony Stark, Q said, his voice carrying godlike amusement. Did you really think your little accident was an accident? That of all the infinite timelines and realities, you just happened to fall into the one where humanity evolved beyond its violent, acquisitive nature. Please, give me some credit for staging. Tony's armor systems went into full alert. You brought me to the Enterprise deliberately? Naturally, Q said, waving dismissively. You were becoming tedious in your timeline, brilliant but isolated, powerful but alone, convinced that individual genius was humanity's only hope. So I gave you a peek at an alternate path. Consider it a cosmic intervention. You're welcome. The other council members' beings Tony couldn't fully comprehend, existing partially outside linear time, watched with expressions ranging from disapproval to curiosity. Q, one of them said, a grey-skinned being with large eyes. This was not authorized. The Council does not permit manipulation of temporal subjects without consensus. Oh, the Council doesn't permit lots of things I do, Q replied breezily. But admit it, Stark's growth was remarkable. He learned cooperation, accepted accountability, recognized the value of trust. He's returning to his timeline a better human. Isn't that what we want? The ends do not justify the means, another council member said, this one appearing vaguely reptilian. Manipulation, even well-intentioned, violates free will. Does it though? Q challenged. I didn't force Stark to learn anything. I simply provided opportunity. He chose to trust Picard's crew, chose to accept monitoring, chose to cooperate in closing the rift. All I did was arrange the meeting. The growth was his. Tony found his voice. So this whole thing, the rift, the Enterprise, the threat of having my brain wiped, it was all a setup? Not all of it, Q admitted. The rift was genuine, the dimensional instability was real, and if left unclosed, both realities would have eventually suffered cascade failure. I simply nudged your experimental parameters to ensure the breach occurred near the Enterprise rather than in empty space. The rest unfolded naturally. You risked 2 universes to teach me a lesson? Tony's voice rose in anger. I risked nothing, Q said calmly. I knew you'd figure it out. I knew Picard would help. I knew the outcome before it began. That's the advantage of being omniscient. I don't gamble, I arrange. Q said what appeared to be the council leader. Return Stark to his timeline, and consider yourself reprimanded for unauthorized temporal manipulation. Reprimanded. Oh no, what will I do? Q rolled his eyes theatrically, but then his expression turned serious as he looked at Tony. Stark, pay attention. I'm about to give you the only genuine advice you'll ever receive from me. The Federation you saw isn't inevitable. It's not humanity's destiny, it's one possible future among infinite alternatives. Your timeline could become that future, could become something worse, could become something entirely different. The choice belongs to you and your species. So why show it to me? Tony asked. Because among all the infinite Starks across infinite timelines, you have the best chance of guiding humanity toward cooperation rather than destruction. You've already started stopping weapons production, forming the Avengers, sharing technology when it serves the greater good. But you've been doing it alone, trusting no one, carrying burdens that should be shared. I showed you an alternative approach. What you do with that knowledge is up to you. Q snapped his fingers, and reality folded again. Tony materialized in his workshop with a stumble, catching himself on a workbench. The familiar smell of machine oil and ozone filled his nostrils. Arc reactor glow illuminated the space, his reactors, dozens of them in various stages of assembly. Jarvis's interface screens glowed with suspended calculations from his dimensional experiment. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. "Sir," Jarvis said immediately, "are you all right? Your vital signs spiked dramatically. The arc reactor experiment appears to have caused significant neural stress." Tony checked his internal HUD. 37 seconds had passed since the energy spike that sent him through the rift. From his perspective, he'd spent nearly 2 days aboard the Enterprise. From his workshop's perspective, barely half a minute had elapsed. "Jarvis, run full diagnostics on my memories for the last from my subjective experience 48 hours. Check for coherence, consistency, and impossible elements. Processing, sir." "This will take several minutes." Tony sank into his workshop chair, mind racing. Had it been real? The Enterprise, Picard, Data, the philosophical debates and technological marvels? Or had 37 seconds of dimensional energy exposure given him the most vivid hallucination in history? His hand moved to the pocket of his armor, seeking the data storage unit Geordi had given him. His fingers touched metal. Worf's Dig Tag, the Klingon blade. Real, physical, impossible to hallucinate. He pulled it out, examining the weapon under his workshop lights. Klingon craftsmanship, folding blades, metal alloys that his sensors couldn't quite identify. Either he'd actually visited a starship from the future, or he'd gone insane and fabricated this knife from his own workshop materials without remembering it. "Jarvis, scan this blade." "Materials analysis." "Scanning, sir." "Composition is unusual. The primary alloy contains elements I cannot identify. Several atomic structures do not match any known configuration in my database. Sir, this object should not exist according to known metallurgy." Tony set the blade down carefully. "Real, then. Or at least, not fabricated by his subconscious." "Memory diagnostic complete," Jarvis announced. "Your memories of the past 48 hours show perfect coherence and consistency. No signs of confabulation, false memory syndrome, or neurological damage from the energy exposure. However, the content of those memories suggests experiences that cannot have occurred in 37 seconds of local time. Because they occurred outside local time," Tony muttered. "Temporal relativity, dimensional displacement, Q's omnipotent manipulation." "Jarvis, do we have any data from the arc reactor at the moment of the energy spike?" "Affirmative, sir. Energy readings were off-scale. The reactor briefly achieved the zero-point energy interface you were attempting, but the quantum field resonance created cascading effects through subspace." Jarvis paused. "Sir, I don't have subspace in my physics database." "Where did that term originate?" "From the future," Tony said quietly. "Or an alternate timeline, or both." "Jarvis, catalog everything I remember about Federation technology, physics, and social structures. Store it separately from primary systems. And check for the data storage unit Geordi LaForge gave me. Should be in my armor's storage compartment." "Checking, sir. I'm detecting a cylindrical device in compartment 7 that I have no record of loading." The device contains what appears to be crystalline data storage of a type I've never encountered. Attempting to interface, Tony waited, hardly breathing. If the device was real, if it contained actual data from the future, then everything had happened. The Enterprise, the Temporal Council, Q's revelation that Tony's displacement was orchestrated to teach him cooperation and trust. "Sir," Jarvis said slowly, "I'm accessing the device. It contains approximately 800 terabytes of information. Historical records, technological principles, cultural databases, and as promised, a substantial collection of jazz recordings. The technological information includes detailed schematics for Federation systems, though many require components and materials that don't exist in our timeline." Tony felt relief flood through him. Real. It had all been real. "There's also a message file," Jarvis continued. "Audio-visual, recorded by Commander Data. Shall I play it?" "Play it." The holographic display activated, showing Data's golden face with perfect clarity. The android's expression carried the curiosity and analytical precision Tony remembered. "Mr. Stark," Data's recorded voice said, "if you are viewing this, you have successfully returned to your timeline and verified that your experiences aboard the Enterprise were genuine rather than hallucination or dream. I calculated a 73% probability that you would question the reality of your visit, hence this message. The data storage unit contains information we believe will assist your timeline's development without violating temporal protocols. We have excluded any technology that could be weaponized or that requires materials unavailable to your era. What remains are principles, energy efficiency models, medical frameworks, computational architectures, and philosophical treatises on cooperative governance. Captain Picard asked me to convey his hope that you will use this information wisely and share it appropriately. The Federation was built on shared knowledge, not hoarded secrets. Perhaps your timeline can build something similar, though the path will necessarily differ. Finally, I wanted to address our earlier conversation about consciousness and purpose. You asked if I was truly self-aware or merely simulating awareness. After our discussions, I have concluded that the question matters less than the action. Whether my consciousness is genuine or not, I choose to act with curiosity, compassion, and dedication to principles larger than myself. That choice defines me more than the substrate of my existence. I believe the same applies to you, Mr. Stark. You have defined yourself as a protector, an innovator, someone who uses exceptional abilities for the greater good. But you have done this alone, trusting no one, bearing burdens that should be shared. Our brief time together showed you an alternative: cooperation, accountability, distributed responsibility. What you choose to do with that knowledge will define who you become. Choose wisely. And remember, you are not alone unless you insist on being. Live long and prosper, Tony Stark. Data out. The hologram faded, and Tony found himself staring at empty air. An android from the future or alternate reality telling him to trust people, share responsibility, choose cooperation over isolation, and Q, an omnipotent being, arranging the entire encounter just to teach him that lesson. Jarvis, what's the status of the Temporal Council's monitoring protocols? Vale said they'd activate immediately upon my return. Scanning for external monitoring systems, sir. I'm detecting low-level subspace radiation emanating from your arc reactor, extremely faint, but persistent. It appears to be a quantum entanglement marker. If I'm interpreting this correctly, which is uncertain given my limited understanding of subspace mechanics. The marker allows detection of dimensional or temporal experiments, but does not provide surveillance of your daily activities. So they were watching, but only for violations. Cosmic probation. Exactly as promised. Tony stood, pacing his workshop. The familiar space felt smaller now, more limited. He'd seen what humanity could build: starships that explored galaxies, technology that eliminated scarcity, societies built on cooperation and diversity. And he'd returned to a world where nations still warred, where poverty persisted despite sufficient resources, where his own team of heroes fought alone because institutions failed. The contrast was staggering. "Sir," Jarvis interrupted his thoughts, "I'm receiving an encrypted communication on SHIELD frequencies. Priority Alpha. Director Fury wants to speak with you immediately. Put him through." Nick Fury's face appeared on the holographic display, his one good eye assessing Tony with the paranoid precision of a career spy. "Stark, your workshop just registered an energy spike that lit up sensors from here to Switzerland. Energy output equivalent to a nuclear detonation. Except it didn't destroy anything. Care to explain?" Tony considered lying, deflecting, keeping the entire Enterprise experience secret. That's what he'd have done before control information. Trust no one. Operate independently. But Data's words echoed. "You are not alone, unless you insist on being. I accidentally punched a hole through dimensions and spent 2 days on a starship from an alternate timeline where humanity evolved into a post-scarcity, cooperative society that explores space for scientific curiosity rather than military advantage. I learned about technology centuries beyond ours, met an android who might be conscious, debated philosophy with a Vulcan, and discovered that an omnipotent being named Q orchestrated the entire thing to teach me about trust and cooperation. Also, I'm now being monitored by a temporal council from multiple timelines to make sure I don't accidentally destroy reality again. How's your day been?" Fury stared at him for a long moment. "Stark, I can't tell if you're screwing with me or if you've finally lost your damn mind." "Neither," Tony replied. "I'm telling you the truth. For once, complete unvarnished truth. Because apparently, keeping secrets and operating alone is what got me into this mess. So here's me trying something different. Honesty and trust. Novel concepts, I know. You're serious. Completely. Jarvis, transmit the non-classified portions of Data's data storage to Director Fury. Let him verify I'm not hallucinating. Sir, that may violate. Do it, Jarvis. If I'm supposed to learn cooperation, might as well start with SHIELD. Even if they're kind of a disaster sometimes." There was a pause while Fury presumably reviewed the transmitted data. His expression shifted from skepticism to calculation to something approaching wonder. "This is real," Fury said quietly. "This is actually real. Stark, you've got technical specifications here that are decades beyond our current capabilities. If we could implement even a fraction of this, shared appropriately," Tony interrupted. "Not weaponized, not hoarded, not used to create advantage over other nations. Shared to benefit humanity. That's the deal, Fury. The Federation works because knowledge is public, because advancement benefits everyone, because cooperation replaces competition. If we're going to use this information, we do it the Federation way." Fury was silent for a long moment. "You really did learn something from this experience." "Yeah," Tony admitted. "I learned that my way, the isolated genius solving problems alone, might keep me safe, but it keeps humanity small. The Federation shows what we could become if we trusted each other, worked together, shared what we know. I'm not saying we can recreate the Federation overnight, but maybe we can start moving in that direction. The World Security Council won't like giving up technological advantages. Then they can build their own dimensional rifts and visit alternate timelines. I'm done operating based on fear and paranoia. The Temporal Council is already monitoring me to make sure I don't destroy reality. Might as well do something productive with the knowledge I brought back." Fury almost smiled. "Stark, this might be the first time you've ever suggested cooperation without having to be forced into it. I'm impressed. And suspicious. What's the catch?" "No catch. Just a guy who spent 2 days seeing humanity's potential and decided he wants to help achieve it. Even if it means trusting people I'm not sure deserve trust yet. Even if it means sharing knowledge that could be misused. Because the alternative, keeping everything locked away, controlling everything myself, that path leads nowhere good." "Philosophical Stark is weird," Fury said. "I'm not sure I like it. Get used to it. I've got 800 terabytes of Federation philosophy, history, and culture to process. I'm going to be insufferable about cooperation and diversity for at least the next decade. Great, just what the Avengers needed. Stark with ideals. But Fury's expression softened slightly. That said, if you're serious about sharing this information through proper channels, I'll set up meetings with Science Division and the World Security Council. We'll do this right, transparent, cooperative, benefiting everyone. The Federation way, as you put it. Appreciated, Director. Stark? One more thing. This Q being, who supposedly orchestrated everything, any idea what his endgame is? Tony thought about Q's parting words, about how the Federation wasn't inevitable but one possible future among infinite alternatives. I think he wants to see if humanity can evolve, if we can become something better than we are. He arranged this whole experience to show me the destination. What we do with that knowledge, that's our choice. Then let's make the right choice, Fury said, and the communication ended. Tony stood in his workshop, holding a Klingon blade in one hand and a data storage unit from the future in the other. He'd fallen through dimensions, seen humanity's potential, learned lessons about cooperation and trust from an omnipotent trickster god. And now he had to figure out how to apply those lessons in a world that wasn't ready for them yet. But maybe that was the point. Maybe humanity didn't need to be ready. Maybe they just needed someone willing to start the conversation, to plant the seeds, to demonstrate that a better future was possible. Tony activated his workshop's main display, pulling up plans for the next generation arc reactor. But this time, instead of working alone, he started composing messages to Bruce Banner, whose brilliance with gamma radiation could advance clean energy, to Pepper Potts, whose business acumen could structure cooperative frameworks, to Steve Rogers, whose idealism aligned surprisingly well with Federation principles, to the Avengers, who needed to understand they weren't just a team, they were the beginning of something larger. He was building a Federation, not overnight, not perfectly, but deliberately. One conversation, one shared patent, one cooperative project at a time. The workshop door opened, and Pepper walked in, carrying coffee and concern in equal measure. Jarvis said you had an experimental accident. Are you all right? Tony looked at her. Brilliant, capable, someone he'd kept at arm's length for years because trusting people meant vulnerability. But Data's words echoed again. Asking for help is strength, not weakness. Pepper, he said, I need to tell you about where I've been, and then I need your help building something impossible. Interested? She studied his face, saw something different there. Always. What happened, Tony? So he told her everything. The Rift, the Enterprise, Picard's crew, Data's consciousness, Sarek's logic, Q's manipulation, the Federation's cooperative society, their post-scarcity economics, their dedication to diversity and exploration, the Temporal Council's monitoring, the knowledge he'd brought back, the choice he now faced. Pepper listened without interrupting, her analytical mind processing implications even as her eyes widened at the impossible scope of his story. So, she finally said, you spent 2 days in a utopian future where humanity solved its major problems through cooperation and shared resources. And an omnipotent being arranged the whole thing to teach you about trust. And now you want to help Earth become more like that future, which requires you to actually trust people and share your technology. That's the summary, yes. Pepper was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled, genuine, warm, proud. Tony, I've been trying to get you to trust people and share responsibility for years. You had to fall through dimensions and meet an android from the future to learn what I've been telling you all along. In my defense, Data was very persuasive, and Sarek's logical arguments were difficult to refute. I'm sure they were. She set down her coffee and moved closer. But Tony, if you're serious about this, about building toward a cooperative future, about sharing technology for everyone's benefit, about trusting others with responsibilities you've been carrying alone, then I'm in. Completely. This is the future Stark Industries should be working toward anyway. Tony felt something in his chest loosen, not the arc reactor, but something emotional he'd kept locked away. Trust. Actual trust. Thank you, Pepper. I know I'm not easy to work with. I know I've pushed you away more times than I can count. But if I'm going to do this build toward a Federation future, I need people I can trust. And you're at the top of that very short list. Not such a short list anymore, she replied. The Avengers, S.H.I.E.L.D. contacts, scientific colleagues, you have more people ready to help than you think. You've just been too stubborn to ask. Yeah, well, stubborn is kind of my brand. But Data said something that stuck with me. Individual brilliance reaches its apex when combined with collective wisdom. I've been brilliant alone. Maybe it's time to see what happens when I'm brilliant together with others. That, Pepper said, is the most mature thing I've ever heard you say. Don't get used to it. I'm still going to be insufferable most of the time. I'd expect nothing less. They stood together in the workshop, surrounded by technology that represented Tony's individual genius. But now, the technology would become the foundation for something larger, a cooperative effort to move humanity toward the future Tony had glimpsed aboard the Enterprise. It wouldn't be easy. Nations would resist, corporations would oppose, individuals would fear change. The path from Earth's current state to the Federation's ideals would take centuries and cost tremendous effort. But it was possible. Tony had seen the proof. Humanity could evolve, could cooperate, could build a future worth having. And if an omnipotent being thought Tony Stark was the right person to start that process well, who was he to argue with Q? 3 months after his return from the Enterprise, Tony stood before the United Nations General Assembly, knowing this presentation would either change everything or end his credibility forever. The assembly hall buzzed with representatives from 193 nations, each wondering why Tony Stark had requested an emergency session to discuss humanity's future trajectory. Secretary General Okoro, a woman from Nigeria with sharp eyes and diplomatic patience, gavelled the session to order. Mr. Stark, you have the floor. I trust this urgent matter justifies pulling the General Assembly from critical negotiations on climate accords. Tony activated his holographic display, showing Earth from space beautiful, fragile, divided by lines invisible from orbit but deeply entrenched on the surface. Secretary General, delegates, I'm here to talk about what humanity could become if we make different choices. 3 months ago, I had an experience that changed my understanding of our species' potential. I'm going to share that experience, the evidence supporting it, and a proposal for how we move forward. He told them everything: the dimensional rift, the Enterprise, the Federation's post-scarcity society built on cooperation and shared knowledge. He showed them data from Geordi's storage device, technological principles, historical frameworks, philosophical treatises. He presented material analyses of Worf's blade, proving it was constructed from alloys that shouldn't exist by current metallurgy. He shared Jarvis's verification that the information couldn't have been fabricated. The assembly erupted. Delegates shouted questions, accusations, demands for proof. Some called him delusional. Others suggested elaborate hoaxes. A few, those who'd worked with the Avengers during the New York invasion, looked thoughtful rather than dismissive. Order, Secretary General Okoro commanded. Mr. Stark, you're asking us to believe you visited an alternate timeline where humanity evolved into a cooperative post-scarcity society. You're presenting alien artifacts and technology from a non-existent future. You must understand our skepticism. I do, Tony replied. Which is why I'm not asking you to believe me on faith. I'm asking you to examine the evidence scientifically, verify the technology independently, and consider the implications if I'm telling the truth. Because if humanity in another timeline achieved what the Federation represents, then we can too. It's not destiny, it's choice. The Russian delegate stood. And if we accept your story, Mr. Stark, what exactly are you proposing? That Earth abandons sovereignty and economic systems that have existed for centuries, based on information from a dimension that may not exist. I'm proposing we start conversations about what a cooperative future looks like, Tony replied. I'm proposing we examine Federation principles and see which could be adapted to our reality. I'm proposing we stop viewing technological advancement as competitive advantage and start viewing it as shared opportunity. Small steps, not revolution. You want to share Stark Industries technology with everyone, the Chinese delegate said flatly, including nations you consider adversaries. That's either remarkably naive or a strategic ploy. It's neither, Tony said. It's practical. The Federation works because knowledge is public, because advancement benefits everyone, because cooperation produces better outcomes than competition. I'm not suggesting we implement this overnight. I'm suggesting we start pilot programs, clean energy sharing, medical technology cooperation, joint research initiatives, and see if the Federation model actually works here. The assembly dissolved into arguments. Some delegates saw opportunity, others saw threats to national security. A few recognized the revolutionary nature of what Tony proposed, not just technological sharing, but fundamental restructuring of how humanity approached progress. Secretary General Okoro gavelled for order again. Mr. Stark, the General Assembly will take your proposal under advisement. We'll form a committee to examine your evidence and explore possibilities for increased international cooperation on technology and research. But I must warn you, what you're suggesting challenges foundational assumptions about national sovereignty, economic systems, and power structures. Change of this magnitude takes decades, if it occurs at all. I know, Tony replied. The Federation took centuries to build, but they had to start somewhere. I'm suggesting we start here, today, with conversation and small experiments in cooperation. The destination is distant, but the journey begins with a single step. As Tony left the UN building, he found Steve Rogers waiting outside, leaning against his motorcycle with that Captain America patience that could wait out glaciers. Heard your speech got interesting, Steve said. Proposing we rebuild human civilization based on time with an android from the future. That's ambitious even for you. Data would appreciate that you called him an android rather than a robot, Tony replied. And yeah, it's ambitious, probably insane, definitely going to fail more often than it succeeds. But Steve, I saw what humanity can become. I can't unsee that. Steve studied him with those clear blue eyes that had seen humanity at its worst during World War II and somehow still believed in its potential. You're different since the accident, less defensive, more open. You actually asked Bruce to collaborate on clean energy instead of just telling him your solution was better. That's growth. I had good teachers. Picard taught me that cooperation requires genuine respect. Data showed me that asking for help is strength. Sarek proved that logic and emotion aren't opposites, they're complements. Even Q, that omnipotent pain in the ass, demonstrated that sometimes people need to see possibilities before they can believe in them. And now you're trying to show Earth those possibilities. Trying and mostly failing, Tony admitted. Half the UN thinks I'm crazy. The other half thinks I'm plotting world domination through forced cooperation. SHIELD's Science Division is excited about the Federation technology, but terrified of implementing it because it might destabilize existing power structures. The Avengers are supportive, but skeptical. And the Temporal Council is watching everything to make sure I don't accidentally destroy reality again. Sounds like progress to me, Steve said with a slight smile. Change is supposed to be uncomfortable. If everyone immediately agreed with you, you'd know you weren't challenging anything important. They walked together through New York streets, two enhanced individuals moving among ordinary humans going about ordinary lives, lives that could be so much better if humanity made different choices. Steve, Tony said, you fought in World War II. You've seen humanity at its absolute worst. Do you think we can become what the Federation represents? Or am I chasing an impossible dream? Steve was silent for a long moment, watching people pass. I've seen humanity at its worst, yeah, but I've also seen ordinary people make extraordinary choices. I've seen soldiers share rations with starving children. I've seen enemies put aside hatred to help each other survive. I've seen communities rebuild after devastation. choosing cooperation over revenge. Humanity's potential for good is as real as its capacity for evil. Maybe more real, because good requires choice, while evil is often the path of least resistance. So you think we can build a federation? I think if anyone can start that process, it's you. Not because you're the smartest, though you are, but because you've finally learned to trust others with shared responsibility. The Tony Stark who went through that rift was brilliant but isolated. The Tony Stark who came back is brilliant and willing to cooperate. That's the difference between genius and leadership. Tony absorbed that. Leadership. Not control, not domination, but inspiring others towards shared goals. Picard embodied that, commanding through respect and example rather than authority. Maybe that's what humanity needed. Not a single genius solving all problems, but leaders who showed cooperation could work. Thanks, Steve. I needed to hear that. Anytime. Now, Bruce asked me to remind you about the Clean Energy Summit next week. He wants your notes on Federation power generation before then, so he can integrate them with his gamma research. Something about quantum harmonics and zero-point energy that went over my head. I'll send him the files. And Steve? Thanks for not thinking I'm crazy. Oh, I think you're crazy, Steve said with a grin. But sometimes crazy is what progress requires. Just keep the explosions to a minimum this time. 6 months after the UN presentation, Tony stood in Stark Industries' new Cooperative Technology Center, watching scientists from 43 nations work side by side on clean energy solutions. The facility had been designed with Federation principles: open collaboration, shared credit, knowledge freely exchanged. It was small, experimental, often frustrating as cultural differences and language barriers slowed progress. But it was working. Dr. Yuki Tanaka from Japan had just successfully integrated Tony's arc reactor principles with Dr. Amara Okonkwo's Nigerian research on crystalline energy storage. The result was a power cell half the size of Tony's original reactor, producing 70% of the output, using materials available globally rather than rare elements. It wouldn't end energy scarcity overnight, but it was a step. Mr. Stark, Dr. Tanaka called across the lab. We've achieved stable output. Come see. Tony crossed the lab, no longer his lab, but their lab, and examined the power cell's readings. Stable, efficient, reproducible. Not as elegant as his arc reactor, but better in the ways that mattered. It could be built anywhere by anyone with the technical knowledge. This is excellent work, Tony said. Both of you, how soon can we publish the specifications? You want to publish immediately? Dr. Okonkwo asked. Before patenting? Before securing intellectual property rights? That's exactly what I want. Federation principle. Knowledge is public. The moment we start hoarding this for competitive advantage, we stop building toward cooperation. Publish everything. Let the world improve on your design. The two scientists exchanged glances, then smiled. They understood. This wasn't Stark Industries' technology, it was humanity's technology. Sharing it was the point. Tony's communicator chimed with a familiar pattern. Jarvis's voice came through. Sir, you have incoming communication on subspace frequencies. Source identifies as USS Enterprise. Captain Jean-Luc Picard commanding. Tony's heart rate spiked. That's impossible. The rift is closed. How is Picard contacting me? Unknown, sir. But the signal is definitely subspace-based, and definitely claiming to originate from Captain Picard. I recommend answering in private. Tony excused himself from the lab and found a secure conference room. Jarvis, establish connection. Maximum encryption. The holographic display activated, and there was Picard, slightly older than Tony remembered, but unmistakably the captain of the Enterprise. His expression carried warmth mixed with curiosity. Mr. Stark, Picard said, I apologize for the intrusion. I'm contacting you through a carefully calibrated subspace transmission that won't destabilize dimensional barriers. Q informed me rather smugly. I might add that you'd be wondering how I could reach you. Q, Tony said flatly. Of course. So this is real. Not a hallucination or a transmission from my imagination. quite real, though transmitting across dimensional boundaries requires considerable energy and precision. I can only maintain this connection briefly. I wanted to see how you've applied the lessons from your time aboard the Enterprise. Our sensors detected your UN presentation. Subspace monitoring of your timeline is permitted under specific circumstances, and I was impressed by your willingness to share technology and propose cooperative frameworks. I'm trying, Tony said. It's slow, frustrating, and I'm probably failing more than I'm succeeding. But I can't stop seeing what the Federation represents. Every time I'm tempted to hoard technology or work alone, I remember Data's words about collective wisdom and individual brilliance, so I keep trying. That persistence is precisely what humanity needs, Picard replied. Mr. Stark, the Federation wasn't built by perfect people making flawless decisions. It was built by flawed individuals who kept trying despite setbacks. Your timeline may never become identical to ours, it shouldn't, as each reality must find its own path. But the principles of cooperation, shared knowledge, and respect for diversity transcend dimensional boundaries. Those principles work because they're rooted in the best aspects of sentient nature. Captain, can I ask you something? The Temporal Council, Q's manipulation, all of it, was my dimensional displacement really an accident? Or was it always planned to teach me about cooperation? Picard smiled slightly. Q refuses to answer that question directly. He claims that revealing whether events were orchestrated or genuinely accidental would spoil the narrative satisfaction. However, I can tell you this. Q believes humanity in your timeline has extraordinary potential. He wouldn't expend effort manipulating events for a species he considered unworthy of growth. Take from that what you will, Tony laughed. So Q's cosmic seal of approval is, I won't tell you if I manipulated you because that would ruin the story. That's very on-brand for an omnipotent trickster. Indeed, Mr. Stark, I must close this transmission soon. Maintaining dimensional connection drains considerable resources. But I wanted you to know, the Enterprise crew remembers you. Data asks frequently about your progress. Geordi hopes you're making use of the technical information. Even Ambassador Sarek admitted, in his logical Vulcan way, that you demonstrated capacity for growth. You made an impression on us, and we're honored to have played a role in your evolution. Captain, thank you for everything, for defending me, for teaching me, for showing me humanity's potential. I won't let those lessons go to waste. I know you won't. Live long and prosper, Tony Stark. Picard out. The transmission ended, and Tony sat in the quiet conference room, processing. The Enterprise crew remembered him. Picard had expended considerable resources just to check on his progress. Even across dimensional barriers, the connections he'd formed mattered. He wasn't alone. Not anymore. 1 year after the dimensional breach, Tony convened the first meeting of what he was calling the Cooperative Initiative representatives from the Avengers, S.H.I.E.L.D., the UN, private research institutions, and academic organizations. The goal: create frameworks for technology sharing, joint research, and coordinated responses to global challenges. 53 people gathered in Stark Towers Conference Center. Steve Rogers represented the Avengers' perspective on team coordination. Nick Fury brought S.H.I.E.L.D's strategic viewpoint. Dr. Bruce Banner presented clean energy proposals. Pepper Potts outlined economic models for post-scarcity transition. Secretary General Okoro attended via holographic link to provide UN oversight. Tony stood before them, feeling the weight of expectation but also the support of genuine partnership. He wasn't carrying this burden alone anymore. Thank you all for coming, Tony began. A year ago, I fell through dimensions and saw humanity's future. Not our destiny, our potential. A future where cooperation works, where diversity is celebrated, where knowledge is shared freely. Today, we start building toward that future. Not by imposing it, not by forcing change, but by demonstrating through pilot programs and voluntary cooperation that the Federation model works here too. He outlined proposals. Joint research facilities modeled on the Cooperative Technology Center. clean energy sharing programs, medical technology cooperation, cultural exchange initiatives celebrating diversity, educational frameworks teaching cooperative problem-solving, small steps, but deliberate ones, each moving humanity incrementally toward Federation principles. This will take generations, Tony concluded. We won't see the Federation in our lifetimes, but our children might. Our grandchildren definitely. The future isn't inevitable, it's built through choices we make today. So let's choose cooperation over competition. Let's choose shared knowledge over hoarded secrets. Let's choose to believe that humanity can be better than we are now. The room was silent for a moment. Then Steve stood, drawing everyone's attention. I've watched Tony Stark evolve over the years. We've been teammates, Steve said. I've seen him grow from a man who trusted no one to someone willing to put faith in others. This initiative represents that growth. It represents hope, not naive optimism, but genuine belief that humanity can choose cooperation. I'm in. The Avengers are in. Let's build something worth having. One by one, others stood. Dr. Banner, committing his research to shared programs. Fury, pledging SHIELD resources to cooperative ventures. Pepper, restructuring Stark Industries around collaborative models. Secretary General Okoro, promising UN support for pilot initiatives. Not everyone agreed. Some representatives left, convinced Tony was either crazy or plotting world domination. Some stayed but remained skeptical. Some half-committed, waiting to see if cooperation actually produced results. But enough believed. Enough were willing to try. And that, Tony realized, was how the Federation started. Not with universal agreement, but with enough people willing to experiment with cooperation, to test whether shared knowledge and distributed responsibility actually worked. The meeting ended with action items, timelines, and commitments. Real progress, not just philosophical discussions. Tony felt hope genuine, earned hope based on seeing people choose collaboration over isolation. As the conference center emptied, Data's words echoed again. You are not alone unless you insist on being. Tony Stark was finally learning not to insist. Late that night, Tony stood in his workshop, no longer a solitary space, but one opened regularly for collaborative projects. The Klingon blade sat on his desk next to the data storage device, physical reminders of what humanity could become. The arc reactor in his chest glowed steadily, keeping him alive, powering his armor, symbolizing his evolution from weapons manufacturer to protector to what? Builder? Collaborator? Leader? All of the above, perhaps. Jarvis, Tony said. Pull up the Federation timeline database. I want to review the years between first contact with Vulcans and the actual formation of the Federation. How long did it take humans to go from meeting aliens to building a cooperative multi-species alliance? 98 years, sir. From first contact in 2063 to Federation Charter in 2161. Nearly a century of slow progress, setbacks, conflicts, and gradual learning that cooperation worked better than competition. 98 years, Tony repeated. So we're in year one of a century-long process. That's simultaneously encouraging and depressing. Sir, might I offer an observation? Always, Jarvis. You have spent the past year implementing Federation principles in increasingly significant ways. The Cooperative Technology Center has produced 3 major innovations shared globally. The Avengers now operate with genuine teamwork rather than coordinated individualism. Stark Industries has restructured toward collaborative rather than competitive models. These are not small achievements. Progress is measurable, even if slow. Thanks, Jarvis. I needed that perspective. You are welcome, sir. Also, I should note that the Temporal Council's monitoring has detected no violations of dimensional or temporal protocols. You are, by their standards, behaving responsibly. They sent a formal notification commending your cooperation. The Temporal Council sent me a gold star? That's simultaneously reassuring and deeply weird. I believe the actual term was satisfactory compliance, but yes, essentially cosmic approval. Tony smiled, looking out his workshop windows at New York's night skyline. Millions of people out there, living their lives, mostly unaware that in another reality, humanity had evolved into something extraordinary. But that was changing, one collaborative project at a time, one shared innovation at a time, one choice for cooperation over isolation at a time. The cooperative initiative would grow. The Federation model would spread not through force, but through demonstration. Humanity would stumble, make mistakes, face setbacks. But the destination was real. Tony had seen it. And if an omnipotent being thought Tony Stark was the right person to start humanity on that path, then Tony would do everything in his power to honor that trust. The workshop door opened, and Pepper entered with her tablet, and that expression that meant she had 17 things for Tony to review. But her smile was genuine, proud of what they were building together. "Ready for tomorrow's meeting with the UN Science Council?" she asked. "Always," Tony replied. "What are we building this time?" "A better future," Pepper said. "One cooperative project at a time." Tony looked at his arc reactor's glow, at Worf's blade, at the data storage from a future he'd briefly inhabited, at Pepper, standing beside him as partner rather than subordinate, at Jarvis's interface, sophisticated AI supporting rather than replacing human judgment, at the night sky beyond his windows, stars that humanity would someday explore if they made the right choices now. "Then let's get to work," Tony said. "To boldly go where no one has gone before." Pepper raised an eyebrow. "Did you just quote Star Trek?" "I met Star Trek, lived it for 2 days, learned from it for a year. Damn right I'm quoting it. Besides, it's a good philosophy. Boldly go, explore unknown possibilities, seek out new solutions. The Federation figured that out. Maybe it's time Earth did too." "One small step," Pepper said, "for a species with tremendous potential," Tony finished. "Let's see if we can live up to it." Together, they reviewed plans for the next phase of the cooperative initiative. Two brilliant humans working in partnership rather than isolation, building toward a future that existed in another reality, but could exist here too if humanity chose it. The journey of 100 years began with collaborative action today. And Tony Stark, genius, futurist, recovering individualist, was finally learning that the best way to protect humanity's future was to trust humanity to build it together. The Enterprise had taught him well. 5 years had passed since Tony Stark fell through dimensions and glimpsed humanity's potential. The cooperative initiative had expanded to 87 nations, produced revolutionary advances in clean energy and medical technology, and fundamentally shifted global conversations about knowledge sharing and collaborative innovation. It wasn't the Federation, not yet. Not even close, but it was a beginning. Tony stood on the observation deck of the International Space Station, looking down at Earth's blue marble beauty. Beside him, Commander Chris Hadfield, the station's current commander, pointed toward a vessel approaching for docking. The first spacecraft powered entirely by arc reactor derivatives developed through the cooperative initiative. Shared technology, built by international teams, representing genuine collaboration. "You did this," Hadfield said. "You started conversations that changed how we think about progress." "Data did this," Tony corrected. "Picard, Geordi, even Sarek's logic and Worf's honor. I just brought their lessons home and tried to apply them. Everything that's happened since, that's humanity choosing cooperation. That's us deciding we can be better." Below them, Earth rotated in its endless dance, still divided by borders, but increasingly connected by shared purpose. It would take decades, more generations, before humanity resembled the Federation. But the trajectory was set. The conversation had begun. The choice for cooperation over competition was being made. Incrementally, persistently, hopefully. Tony's arc reactor glowed steadily in his chest, visible through his shirt. The technology that had saved his life, that had taken him through dimensions, that had become the foundation for cooperative energy solutions. Individual brilliance combined with collective wisdom, exactly as the Federation taught. Jarvis, Tony said quietly through his internal comm. Remind me, in the Federation timeline, how many years from now until first contact with Vulcans? 38 years, sir. First contact occurred in 2063, following humanity's recovery from World War III. You are currently in the year 2025 by your timeline's calendar. 38 years until humanity's wake-up call, if their timeline followed the Federation's path. But maybe, just maybe, they could reach that destination without the nuclear devastation that preceded it. Maybe cooperation now could prevent catastrophe later. That's what the initiative was built on, hope that humanity could evolve proactively, rather than reactively. Tony thought about the Enterprise, still exploring space in another reality. About Data, pursuing consciousness and understanding. About Picard, commanding through respect and wisdom. About a future where humanity's best qualities became policy rather than exception. He'd seen that future, lived it briefly, learned from it extensively. And now he was helping build toward it, one cooperative project at a time, knowing he'd never see the destination but might help others reach it. That was enough. More than enough. Commander Hadfield, Tony said, when that ship docks, I want to meet the engineering team. They built something extraordinary through collaboration. They deserve recognition. You want to celebrate others' achievements? Hadfield smiled. Tony Stark really has changed. Yeah, Tony agreed. Turns out falling through dimensions and meeting an android from the future is surprisingly good for personal growth. Who knew? They shared a laugh. And Tony looked back at Earth, beautiful, complicated, full of potential. Humanity's journey to the stars had begun not with individual genius alone, but with collective choice to cooperate, to share, to build together, to boldly go where no one had gone before. The Federation awaited, decades in the future, but the journey had begun today, with Tony Stark choosing trust over isolation, with humanity choosing cooperation over competition, with billions of individual decisions adding up to species-level evolution. Data would be pleased. Picard would approve. Even Sarek might acknowledge the logic of humanity's trajectory. And Q? That omnipotent trickster was probably watching with amusement, satisfied that his cosmic lesson had taken root. Tony Stark smiled, looking at stars that humanity would someday explore as equals among a community of spacefaring civilizations. The future was possible. The Federation was achievable. Humanity could evolve. All it took was the courage to trust, the wisdom to cooperate, and the persistence to keep trying despite setbacks. The journey continued, and Tony Stark, genius, futurist, reluctant collaborator, was honored to be part of it.